You can find almost anything if you look in the fossil record that resembles something else. That means nothing. Paleontologist Lawrence Whitmer of Ohio University, in a commentary, stated, "Perhaps the time has come to finally accept that Archaeopteryx was just another small, feathered, bird-like theropod fluttering around in the Jurassic." What do evolutionists say about fully modern birds found in the early strata before Archaeopteryx supposedly evolved these fused fingers together? You guessed it, nothing. Stephen Jay Gould said, "It's a curious mosaic, not a transitional fossil." Even the stinkbird, alive today, is a species of tropical bird found in swamps, forests, and mangroves in the Amazon and in South America. It is notable for having chicks that possess claws. The truth? Hand claws are actually widespread in modern birds, and not all that unusual. Ornithologists say Archaeopteryx is a bird, as where paleontologists say it's a dinosaur. Not even a consensus between the sciences. The new rave in evolutionism is that birds are just dinosaurs, and that dinosaurs evolved into birds. There is a joke that KFC should change its name to KFD, Kentucky Fried Dinosaur. But not all of evolutionary scientists accept this nonsense. A proponent is one renowned ornithologist, Alan Feducci of the University of North Carolina. He recently stated, "The theory that birds are the equivalent of living dinosaurs and that dinosaurs were feathered is full of holes, so much so that creationists have jumped all over it." He further laments, "With the advent of feathered dinosaurs, we are truly witnessing the beginning of the meltdown of the field of paleontology. Those looking for evidence that birds evolved from dinosaurs will be disappointed, because the Creator told us that He created birds before land animals, such as dinosaurs." In 1994, the esteemed journal Science shocked the scientific world by publishing sequence data from DNA retrieved from dinosaur bone thought to be 80 million years old. DNA is a fragile molecule, and so it breaks down quickly. Measurements of DNA stability suggest that it could only last thousands of years, at best, only under perfect conditions. But 80 million years was just too incredible for skeptical scientists. Eventually, these skeptics were vindicated, as it became apparent that the original researchers had sequenced contaminated human DNA, not dinosaur DNA. However, in 2012, a different group of researchers published new results supporting the discovery of actual dinosaur DNA. These new results eventually became impossible to disprove or avoid, with the researchers applying multiple checks against contamination from non-dinosaur sources. The preservation of dinosaur DNA doesn't make any sense from an evolutionary perspective, but it fits the biblical history whereby dinosaurs lived thousands of years ago, not millions of years ago. Evolutionists have to invoke rescuing devices to get around these problems, like usual. How do you think our view of dinosaurs would change if everyone knew scientists found carbon-14 in their bones? Well, a group of geophysicists have discovered exactly that, carbon-14 in dinosaur bones. This is indeed a shocking proposal for those who believe that the last dinosaur died out 65 million years ago, because carbon-14 decays so fast that it could not possibly survive that long. There should be not one atom of carbon-14 present in dinosaur bones if they are really as old as they claim to be. After going to great lengths to rule out contamination, the researchers concluded that they had indeed found carbon-14 in dinosaur bones. These results seriously undermine the evolutionary story of long ages in Earth's history. However, they fit nicely with the biblical history, where dinosaurs lived only thousands of years ago. In the early 90s, researchers from Montana State University made an amazing discovery. Inspecting a piece of T-Rex bone under a microscope, they could hardly believe their eyes. They could see dinosaur red blood cells. This discovery prompted lead scientist Mary Schweitzer to say, "It is exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone, but of course I couldn't believe it." I said to the lab technician, "The bones after all are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long?" In the A Discover magazine article, Dr. Schweitzer explained further her response. "If you take blood cell samples and you stick them on the shelf, you have nothing recognizable in about a week. Why would there be anything left in dinosaurs? Well, the only reason there would be anything left in dinosaurs comes down to there being iron in the blood. However, this excuse falls short, as you are about to see. But first, let's touch on two other reasons that this cannot happen. As I am explaining these two other major problems with why dinosaur bones cannot be 65 million years old, look at all the findings of soft tissue discovered recently and how they know to look for it now, rather than just assume it doesn't exist at all. Problem number 1. The mostly left-handed amino acids that should be equally right-handed and left-handed if they were Jurassic. They are not there. The laws of chemistry demonstrate that after death, amino acids go back to a 50-50 mixture of right and left-handed amino acids. The England's Royal Society published a time range for when this physical process to occur, which produces totally racemized amino acid in 100,000 to 1 million years maximum. So, obviously, that is not even close to 65 million years old. Another problem, the amino acid methionine is very susceptible to strong oxidizing agents like hydrosol, which would quickly oxidize methionine into methionine sulfoxide. The Nature Communications study results revealed unoxidized methionine in some of the Alberta dinosaur specimens. Also consider this. The research on the Egyptian mummies has established a 10,000-year upper limit for how long biological molecules can survive. Now, back to iron for just a moment. If you want to see the rescuing device for iron preservation fail in real time, it's easy, just look for yourself. One of the most striking examples of soft tissue preservation in dinosaur fossils. If you look at the photos in the paper, you see no evidence of iron particles. The only place she saw iron was inside partially degraded tissue. You see, iron in blood, which gets released at death, cannot preserve all soft tissue decay for millions of years because it still degrades collagen proteins, which have also been found in some specimens. So while iron might preserve some soft tissue, it obviously is not responsible for all soft tissue preservation. Also consider that iron would be incapable of preserving soft dinosaur tissue if it could actually distribute it from the dinosaur's blood throughout all the tissue. Of course, Mary Schweitzer and her team totally submerged specimens to preserve them to obtain the results they desired. But the only way to accomplish this naturally is distributed by water. Well, guess what? That brings up another huge problem, as water also degrades soft tissue before iron can preserve it. In addition to this, soft tissue has also been found in bones not directly associated with iron-rich blood, like in the bone horn of the Triceratops and bird feathers. The old Earth idea was developed historically, not from letting the physical facts speak for themselves, but by imposing anti-biblical philosophical assumptions onto their geological observations, the idea driving the conclusion. The new rave in evolutionism is that birds are just dinosaurs and that dinosaurs evolved into birds. There is a joke that KFC should change its name to KFD, Kentucky Fried Dinosaur. But not all of evolutionary scientists accept this nonsense. A proponent is one renowned ornithologist, Alan Feducci of the University of North Carolina. He recently stated, "The theory that birds are the equivalent of living dinosaurs and that dinosaurs were feathered is full of holes, so much so that creationists have jumped all over it." He further laments, "With the advent of feathered dinosaurs, we are truly witnessing the beginning of the meltdown of the field of paleontology. Those looking for evidence that birds evolved from dinosaurs will be disappointed, because the Creator told us that He created birds before land animals, such as dinosaurs." The old Earth idea was developed historically, not from letting the physical facts speak for themselves, but by imposing anti-biblical philosophical assumptions onto their geological observations, the idea driving the conclusion.
My scientific colleagues go to places like Greenland, the Arctic, they go to Antarctica, and they drill into the ice with hollow drill bits. It's not that extraordinary. Many of you have probably done it yourselves, drilling other things, hole saws to put locks in doors, for example. And we pull out long cylinders of ice, long ice rods. And these are made of snow. And by long tradition, it's called snow ice.
Bill Nye here thinks that because they test ice core layers up to 680,000 years old, that alone is enough to disprove young Earth creationism and prove long-scale evolution to be true. What he doesn't know is that this argument does not help his cause whatsoever. Let me explain.
When it comes to the ice core layers, we actually found what's called the Lost Squadron. And the Lost Squadron were a plane that were lost during World War II. And when a very rich man wanted to come along and he wanted to buy those planes and put them on his property or start a museum, not really sure which one he wanted to do, he wanted to go find these planes. So he spent a lot of money and he went out there and he assumed that he would just see the planes, but he couldn't. And they were actually so far down that when they actually dug down, they found them, which would have been an equivalent of 135,000 years, because the layers weren't laid down every year. They were laid down by cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot. So the prediction of ice core layers, when they see those strata, which look like they're annual, are actually just dependent on the day or the season, and they can fluctuate and change.
This is probably one of the most simple and basic evidences that dinosaurs lived with man. This is the original photo, found in Utah. The Native Americans drew it on a stone. They actually used a pecking mechanism to pound this into the rock. Anybody can look at this image and realize that it's a dinosaur. You could show it to a 5-year-old and they will recognize it as a dinosaur. It even has a face on it. You can see the mouth and eyes. When a skeptic looks at this, however, they don't see it. I don't know why, but they don't. As a matter of fact, a lot of them say no, what they were actually drawing was probably just a lizard. Well, I'm not convinced of this argument, because look, you can tell they know what a lizard looks like. Here's a goat. Here are some snakes. Yet, look at this. So I believe they drew what they saw, and this video will be my theory. See, to make rock carving images, ancient natives used an object to chip away the original rock in a process called pecking, which leaves behind tiny holes or divots. In a recent report, researchers tried to discredit this interesting depiction of a dinosaur by saying the legs are not part of the image, they are not pecked or otherwise man-made, but they are stained of mud or some other light-colored material or mineral. As their sketch here shows, they maintain that what looks like a dinosaur is really just a snake glyph with a stain below it. Evolutionary biologist Phil Sinter co-authored a paper in an online journal, asserted the theropod-like image was not what it appears to be. They wrote that it is a composite of 2 separate petroglyphs, and that its apparent legs were created by a mud or mineral stain. They claim that this artifact is now officially discredited, which of course would be the sigh of relief news for evolutionists and dinosaur age, and bad news for the creation model of Earth's history. Fortunately, since the method used in the study was basically done just by looking at the artifact, virtually anyone can cross-check the author's observation, which is exactly what has been done, with common sense testing. But first, they lie about the lower body portion only being stained, and no peck marks making up the lower body, as peck marks extend down into the presumed body of the petroglyph, even extending down into the area where the legs are, contrary to what they tell the public. Here are some pictures of this. Daryl Robbins documented this petroglyph in the summer of 2010. The body and leg area pecking divots were obvious to Robbins, who after reading Sinter's report replied, "From my picture, it is clear that the whole dinosaur shape is chipped into the rock surface, not just a mud stain. It's pretty sad when a lowly IT guy does better scientific investigations than scientists. There is a difference between being debunked and being declared debunked. This petroglyph has not really been discredited as a dinosaur except through mass media. They know that the average person cannot access these easily without a ladder to see them for themselves, so they know that they can just get away with saying what they want and people will just believe it." Similar to what evolutionary theory has become today, belief and imagination about something that happened that is not observable or testable or repeatable. So upon a huge ledge where this petroglyph is that depicts this large dinosaur, Jan Cameron did an extensive rock art rubbing of the dinosaur image. She was commissioned by a Canadian government to do a rock art rubbing on fossils because it picked up details that the human eye cannot see. Her scientific analysis absolutely reveals that it is a dinosaur. The dinosaur image was made using a hammer, stone, and a deer antler tint. They would peck hundreds of holes to get the proper texture and create the image seen still today on these rock formations. So when someone can walk up, place a sheet of thick paper over the image and rub chalk over it and get the perfect image of a dinosaur, including using USB portable microscopes and multiple gauge tools to help verify that it is indeed what it looks like, then why believe the so-called experts who just walked up, looked at it, and wielded some story without conducting any scientific experiments? Oh, that's right, never mind, don't question them. They're the paid, true experts. Now, let's give them this and say that the image of this dinosaur is not a dinosaur, and it is a complete fraud, even though that's not true. Now we have a huge problem as well for them, because there's a second sauropod dinosaur immediately to its right of the first, with its head turned back looking at the other, and its tail going underneath the neck of the first. So now they have to discredit two dinosaurs, which they never show nor talk about in pictures, both with peck marks that are made up of their entire bodies, not stains. Stack this with the other evidence of Native American artifacts and the scientific discovery of sauropod coprolites in the area, then the evolutionary dogma of 65 million year old dinosaur crumbles. I urge you to return to common sense. If you want to let them sprinkle on academic stupidity dust on it and just let them lie to you and try to jam another rescuing device down your throat, trying to tell you it's anything but what it obviously is, then be my guest. But the obvious peck marks throughout, the clear visual outline, the rock art cast rubbings made, the fact that there are two dinosaurs side by side, and the many photographs taken by many different people that all show it's clearly a dinosaur by anyone who has common sense looking at these things, then I think it's pretty safe to say we don't need the indoctrinated fearmongers to come along and try to tell you it's all made up. I fear evolutionary paleontologists are highly indoctrinated, so they cannot see the obvious sometimes right in front of them. They can suffer from paranoia because the current living dinosaur is a paleontologist's nightmare. It is a smashing blow to evolutionism, which means they would have to admit what they have told everyone was wrong, what they teach is wrong, and what they believe themselves is wrong. Their cognitive dissonance will never allow it. I urge you to investigate Native American legends and artifacts depicting dinosaur-like creatures. It should leave your mind far more open to the possibility that humans depicted what they saw, because no other logical conclusion could be made as to why people worldwide made up such things. People like Bill Nye here state specifically, you never find a higher modern-day animal mixed in with a lower animal from an ancient time period in the fossil record. Well, he is outright wrong, because he, like most people, have never heard of the Ashley phosphate beds of South Carolina, which is a shame, because it is the best piece of evidence to ever exist currently that man has lived alongside of dinosaurs. Without question. The Ashley phosphate bed is the largest graveyard ever found. This information has been forgotten by the sands of time, but I am going to bring it back. Today, the Ashley phosphate bed is mined for its high quantities of phosphate, which is being used for fertilizer, so there is great money to be made. These sedimentary layers are huge, covering large portions of the Carolinas and extending into Florida all the way up into Canada. World-famous geologist at the time, Louis Agassiz, described the phosphate beds as the greatest graveyard he had ever known. The phosphate beds are so full of bones that it is believed by scientists that the phosphate itself is made from bone. So, if the Ashley phosphate bed is loaded with such an incredible amount of fossils as to cause the leading geologist and zoologist of his day to call them the greatest graveyard he had ever known, you should ask yourself, why has zero mention of this ever been brought up? The fossils completely ravaged the evolutionary timeline. That's why. Remember, if the geologic column is out of place, even in one area on Earth, then it falsifies the theory of evolution, and that the layers form slowly and that they represent time. Well, when you look at this one place where there's an 18-inch thick layer, you will see why it's suppressed. In it are rare fossils of everything from whales and porpoises, fish, sharks, megalodon shark, toads, crocodiles, alligators, turtles, rabbits, monkeys, horses, camels, elephants, mammoth, mastodon, rhinoceroses, giant sloth, muskrats, deer, pig, dogs, hadrosaur dinosaurs, iguanodon dinosaurs, plesiosauruses, ichthyosaurs, and human bones, teeth, and artifacts, all within the same layer. Professor S.F. Holmes, the paleontologist and curator of the College of Charleston's National History Museum, described the fossil graveyard in a report to the Academy of Natural Sciences. He stated, "Remains of the hog, the horse, and other animals of recent date, together with human bones mingled in with the bones of mastodon and extinct giant lizards." And this is on record. The occurrence of a hadrosaur dinosaur remains in the Ashley phosphate beds has not been dealt with in the secular science literature really at all. Only 2 sources exist. They have kept it silent, which is typical. The sad part is, when they first uncovered the relics of the human bone, they immediately became afraid. They, without hesitation, considered their jobs to be at a loss, so they said that the bone was out of place to one another. They immediately threw it in the river to be erased from history and hidden from all view. They knew that such a find would cause them to either probably lose their jobs or their grant funding. And this is all the way back in the late 1800s. They were still in fear of the government from evolutionary dogma, as Darwin's theory had now taken hold. The scientists who studied this knew exactly what they had found. This is why their deep concern for finding such anomalies. Professor of Geology and Paleontology F.S. Holmes believed in the conventional evolutionary sequence. So he knew full well that humans and dinosaurs should not be found in the same layer. In fact, he wrote, "Not long after finding the above-named relics of human workmanship and engaged in our usual visits to the Ashley bed, a bone was found projecting from the bluff. Immediately in contact with the surface of the stormy stratum, we pulled it out, and behold, a human bone. Without hesitation, it was condemned an accidental occupant of quarters to which had no right, geologically, and so we threw it into the river. Alas, we have lived to regret our temerity and rashness. A year later, a lower jawbone with teeth was taken from the same bed, and now we have it in the cabinet." After the news became public, I guess Holmes saw no reasons to cower from his discovery anymore, as Holmes portrayed a dinosaur with a man on the cover of his own book. Evolutionists have admitted that if dinosaurs are ever found with humans, then they would admit that the Noah's flood was real and that man did live alongside of dinosaurs, and that the biblical timeline is true. Because this evidence would validate that the Earth is young and that they had been lied to about our ancient history, There is no rescuing device for them either, because the Ashley phosphate beds had no layers to them. All of the fossils are mixed together in one huge pool of bones, 18 inches thick, covering 200 miles, with no layers found anywhere. The experts who spent considerable time excavating in the phosphate beds have said that there are no layers, and not even a remote resemblance of a layer. It is all one graveyard. You can learn more about the Ashley phosphate bed in a book called Man, Dinosaur, and Mammals Together, written by the late geologist John Watson, available at Mount Blanco Fossil Museum. A statement from the book says, "Since remains of land animals and sea animals were found together, a catastrophic event would have included the burial of enormous numbers of animals, and their subsequent conversion into the rock phosphate over a region of at least 200 miles by 30 miles in extent, which is only partially exposed apart. Such an event is of the order and magnitude of the worldwide Noetic flood." More good evidence is that we also have multiple pieces of physical, observable tracks from around the world where human and dinosaur footprints are found together, and even in some cases overlapping. It would be anecdotal if it was just a single footprint, but we find multiple prints throughout the world and in many different dinosaur strata. Now, if I were to tell a skeptic about this, the first thing that they say is they want visual proof. So, once you supply that, they next claim that it could be anything, even though nothing on Earth looks like a human's foot. But regardless, that's what they say, and this is easy to answer and a rebuttal. The police forensic investigators have actually taken a look at some of these tracks and have confirmed that indeed they are human tracks. So that nullifies their worthless response. The most famous tracks in America, or should I say were in America, are in Glen Rose, Texas. When they first discovered the tracks, it was huge for creationists. They actually called Nova and had them come and film them on site because of this. So Nova was the first to film the dig discovery for each human footprint alongside dinosaur. Creationists insisted that the dig be filmed, telling the public that they wanted verifiable proof through the media live on TV. Unfortunately, there were a couple atheist evolutionists who worked for the company. Nova ended up not doing their job whatsoever, not filming any of the tracks nor the dig. But when they interviewed one another, he was quick to say on live camera that he had not seen anything here to disprove evolution. What he didn't tell the camera was that he had refused to even turn around and look at the tracks that they were working on. When the dig found one, they would tap him on the shoulder and say, "Sir, would you like to take a look at this?" And he would say, "No, I don't want to see it." He stood with his back to the dig and the tracks while making these statements the entire time. After this, they left, and the original photos were taken, which ended up being very important because the very next day, on August 12, 1989, when Don Patterson spoke at the Creation Conference in Dayton, he presented the evidence of pictures to all of the people present. Two well-known evolutionist atheists were present. One of them disrupted the presentation because of their hatred towards creationism. Both had flown from Dallas the morning before and went directly to the Paluxy River. It is reported that they were in the river that afternoon, and one of them, named Glenn Kuban, was with an iron bar, smashing the footprints. 3 days after they had destroyed the footprints, they left, and this is the result we get today. Now, for physical evidence of Noah's Ark, we have discovered two amazing things. At the base of Mount Ararat, they discovered many dragstones. These gigantic stones are strewn about as though they were cut from the ship as the water receded. They are almost in a straight line pattern over 8 miles approaching the mountains. What these are for is counterbalance for a ship during huge waves. When they discovered these, they wanted to actually put this to the test and see that if a ship which weighed as much and was shaped like the Ark, would it withstand massive tidal waves. The results showed perfect results that line up exactly with what we would expect if Noah's Ark was true. The next amazing find is they found the cover that Noah placed over the ark.
As far as we know, there's nothing else like this anywhere. Nobody's ever. My goodness! It's got crosses that are very faintly carved on it. You got a big one here. You got a small one right there. One here. You ever see? It looks like a little bit like pine bark.
It sounds like metal.
No, anchor stone being wood.
This isn't an anchor stone.
Oh, I see.
At one point it says, and Noah came out of the ark and he took the cover off, or he threw the cover off. This is a rather unique thing. It has the appearance and the texture of some kind of a bark.
That is a cross.
Right?
That is a cross.
There you go.
That is incredible.
It has a very hollow sound.
Very hollow. It sounds like metal.
Mankind has always reported his experience with dinosaurs. Throughout human history, man has recorded his experience with dinosaurs. Now, evolutionists, because they refuse to believe real science and history, true history, that man has actually dwelt with and lived with and engaged with dinosaurs and combated, in fact, dinosaurs, they have speculated that the reasons that human beings have had these legends of dragons and these monstrous beasts in the past, these are just myths. They're imagined in the imagination of mankind. The most prominent explanation they give, which is the best argument they can really put forth, is that ancient man saw dinosaur fossils protruding from rocks and therefore pieced together what the organism looked like and then postulated that human beings must have engaged with these things, or there were. Well, that fails for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if they were looking at fossils, why would they continue to write for century after century, long after the fossil had been created, that they were engaging with these creatures? See, that doesn't even make sense. The creature is dead in the rock, but they're talking about creatures that live. Problem. Second problem is, by looking at the fossils, they would not have been able to get an accurate depiction of what the creature looked like. And this is provable, and I'm about to prove that to you. For example, what you see on the screen right now is a 19th century, that is 1800s, depiction of what the best scientific minds at the time believed iguanodon looked like on the left. But modern 20th century anatomists were experts at studying bone structure, how much weight those bones would have carried, and where organs would have been placed, and how much musculature there would have been around surrounding specific bones. Using 20th century technology in a number of ways, come up with the picture you see on the right. The one on the right is accurate. That's what modern technology has provided us. This is what an iguanodon actually looked like. Very similar. I mean, not possibly 100% accurate, but very close to what the organism really looked like. On the left, you see what 19th century man, the best minds in science, probably thought iguanodon looked like. Now, here's another one. This is Megalosaurus. This is a gigantic sloth-like animal. This is a 19th century reproduction of what they thought this Megalosaurus looked like, and the 20th century depiction of it. The one on the right is scientifically derived by studying the bones, muscularity of organisms, etc. The one on the left is made in an unscientific era, like evolution theory was founded in an unscientific era. where man had virtually no knowledge of biological systems at all. That's what they thought the organism looked like. On the left, we see here another example of an animal, a dinosaur. This is a 19th century depiction of it. On the right, you see the 20th century understanding of what the creature actually looked like. These are not the same. Here's another. This is a Sumatran created depiction of dinosaurs housed in the Ethnographical Museum in Budapest. Notice a couple of things about the creatures that they depict here. Firstly, there's a crest on the head, and there's a wattle under the neck. Now, some scientists today say that this creature, Coreanthus, had a wattle, and some say it didn't, but nonetheless, why would the ancients have depicted the creature with a wattle under its neck and a crest on its head? You have to wonder. It could only be because they'd seen it. Now, if you're going to say this is a chicken, where's its wings? It's not. It's a dinosaur. Look at the size of it in comparison to the men. This is an exaggeration. The creature would actually be much larger than that. That's not a chicken. Here's the next one. This is Edmontosaurus. Now, on the left is a Native American depiction of Edmontosaurus in a rock. And on the right, we see Edmontosaurus. This is an accurate depiction of, again, a known species of dinosaur created by ancient man. The reason this creature is standing upright like this is just like a black bear when he becomes in a situation where he's in a threatening situation. He stands upright to make himself look as big and powerful and mean and bad as he possibly can. And so this creature stands upright saying, hey, look at me. Don't mess with me, pal. I'll take you out. This is what this creature is doing. And the Native Americans would never have drawn a two-legged creature, a creature that has two prominent legs, thighs, with a long tail and a head downcast like that, unless they had seen it with their own eyes. Here's another. This one is astonishing. It blows me away. Hanshan culture in China. This is a depiction of a protoceratops with its head down in a conflict. It's believed by even modern evolutionist scientists believe that protoceratops, triceratops, and other ceratopian dinosaurs engaged in headbutting, just like mountain goats do, as a conflict to determine who's going to be the winner over the herd, who gets all the girls. And here we have a beautiful depiction of it right there. Here's another ancient Chinese depiction. Notice the textured coat of the skin. Ancient early 19th century and early 20th century depictions of dinosaurs did not have the textured skin because they did not believe that the skin was textured. Fossilized dinosaur skin has been found and it shows that it's textured. So here we have a skull and a spine with crests going all the way down the back of the creature. We have an upturned spine on the top of the skull, and we have an upturned nose. The comparison is astonishing. There's no reason to believe that these ancients would have depicted such a creature unless they had actually seen it. Then we find fossil evidence of the very creature that they depicted. Here's another one. This is in Ontario, Canada. And this is possibly one of the most profound evidences that man lived with dinosaurs on the earth. This is a sauropod dinosaur depicted by Native Americans in Utah. It's nobody, and I mean nobody, would look at this picture and not know that that is a sauropod dinosaur. You could show that picture to a 3-year-old and they would say, dinosaur! Because obviously it's a dinosaur. Now, to believe that people depicted these creatures and then, which are accurate reproductions of creatures that actually did exist in the past and think they got it right by chance is not believable. It's not. This rock is from ancient Israel. On the left, you see an enhanced photograph so you can see what it looks like better. And on the right, you see an actual photograph in real color of the actual stone. This is from an ancient temple in Israel. We have a dinosaur attacking a horse. Next to it on the left is a 2-legged dinosaur with its mouth wide open, thinking, hey, I want some of that animal too. This is, what animal has ever lived on the earth that had a head that size in relation to a horse? Only a dinosaur. Now here's another one. This is a beautiful one. Stegosaurus on a Cambodian temple built about 1100 AD. Now evolutionists say these are flowers or leaves in the background, and they depicted a pig in the front of it. No, not if you look at the rest of the temple. You see known species of animals not depicted like that. That doesn't make sense. These spines are actually part of the animal's anatomy. This is a Stegosaurus depicted in 1100 AD. This is from the palette of King Narmer. This is from Egyptian. Okay, 1 minute. This is a detail of it. These are sauropod dinosaurs with their necks curled. Here's that sauropod dinosaur from Native America. This is ancient Babylonian. 2 sauropod dinosaurs. Notice the crest on the skull. The crest. Why would they depict a crest? Because they saw the creature. Now, here again, this is another Babylonian depiction of 2 sauropod dinosaurs with crested skulls. And we know that species today, and there they are. Here is an ancient Palestinian. This is called the Nile mosaic of the Palestina. And the words there say crocodile leopard in Greek. And this is Greek men looking at what kind of creature is that? What do you think that is? Anybody who looks at this picture thinks dinosaur. Nobody doesn't. Here in Biloxi, Texas, along the riverbed, they're excavating in early 1970s, excavating layers of rock using heavy equipment at Glen Rose, Texas. And this is what they found. They found dinosaur and human tracks in the same strata of rock. Now, the evolutionists say these are not real human tracks. Notice they never say that the tracks are not dinosaur tracks, but they only say these tracks that are found there that look like human tracks are not human. These are after excavation. There they are. These are early images from the early 1970s. Now here we have the same photograph before and after. Here we go. Here's a photograph of the, notice I've marked footprint for footprint, the same scene photographed by a photographer early and then 20 years later, and we see the photographs. If that's not a human footprint, I don't know what is. That's not a dinosaur footprint, but evolutionists claim it is. That is not a dinosaur footprint. It does not match the anatomy of a dinosaur. I'm going to prove that to you. This is a popular picture passed around by evolutionists, written by an evolutionist who says, look, the mud fell in where the dinosaur stepped. Now look at the shape of the foot. Now, here's what they actually found. That's a theropod, 3-toed dinosaur. You can see the mud collapsing at the top. There's your mud collapse right there. That's mud collapsing. But you can clearly see this is a theropod dinosaur footprint. But what's with this part that's in the green circle I wrote? This is a real dinosaur foot. They don't have a heel. Dinosaurs, the 3-toed dinosaurs do not have a heel. So why does it have this? Right? So here's what they actually found. That's what they found. Look what they found. Look, Drew. The evolutionist himself makes the case for the creationist. He shows that the creature has a arch and a heel and claims the toes are an example of mud collapsing. No, that's mud collapsing. That is a human foot with mud collapsing around it. I'm going to show you a better example of that when I find it. I thought I had a slide for that. Apparently I don't. Nonetheless, this fossil right here kills all the evolutionist arguments. This is the most fantastic fossil ever found. It is a Protoceratops engaged in a fight with a velociraptor. Now, it may not have been a velociraptor, but it was a raptor of some kind, for sure, they know. And in this fossil is captured in 3-dimensional space. These animals were buried alive while they were engaged in a fight. In the mouth of the Protoceratops is the raptor's hand. He has got his mouth on it, and the Velociraptor is clawing at the head of the Protoceratops, trying to stop him from breaking his bones. They were buried so fast that these creatures were buried in place in thick, fluid sediments and frozen in place. They could no longer move. And you have a three-dimensional fossil of a Velociraptor and a Protoceratops engaged in a fight to the death, which of course the Protoceratops would easily win, frozen in space. Now, this is a three-dimensional fossil. It is the most extraordinary fossil that's ever been found. This can only happen if these two creatures were buried so quickly in sediments that were so loose yet so thick at the same time, like moving sand that is full of water but not necessarily sand, like mud, that they were literally frozen, encased in space and stopped and had no ability to move their limbs from that moment forward. They were just whoosh, and that's it. They're frozen in space. That was it. They can no longer move. Their limbs were where they were, and they could not move them left to the right, 1 inch, 2 inches. They're frozen in space. Flooded. This happens immediately. This cannot happen over time, and this kills all the evolutionist arguments about evolution theory and about vast ages of time and fossilization and everything. So with this photograph, I wipe away all the evolutionist belief of vast ages of time and fossilization. They're gone. Now, these all fossils of dinosaurs, therefore, are creatures which were buried immediately by sediments. That's a scientific fact. Okay, so because of that, we can know that whenever we find a fossil of a dinosaur, it's a creature that was buried rapidly, as the fossil record proves, and there was no geologic time involved. This wipes away all of the evolutionists' imaginary evolutionary time for the creation, for the arrival and existence and extinction of living things. It's gone. I'm sorry. That one photograph that I showed you destroys all evolutionist arguments about geologic time. Period. Period. There is no argument that can be levied against this fossil. 2 large dinosaurs weighed hundreds of pounds. The Protoceratops probably weighed anywhere from 800 to 1,100 pounds, frozen in space immediately, that fast, and frozen in time. Fossilization is not something that takes millions of years. I just wiped away for you all the evolutionists' imaginary time.
Have you ever had an evolutionist tell you, just show me one out-of-place fossil? Because, they say the geologic column is so perfectly organized it matches the evolution theory so well. Well, that's not true. Every living fossil, and there are tens of thousands of them, is an out-of-place fossil. Because they can't have existed unchanged for all these millions of years if random mutation and natural selection are what morphs organisms so that new kinds of life are produced over time. So every living fossil, all tens of thousands of them, are all out of place. Now other UPART, that's out of place artifacts. Now, every UPART fossil that has been found, an evolutionist will deny. Here's just one. Isn't this funny? National Geographic. Dinosaur found in mammal's belly. You see, that can't be if evolution theory is correct. Because, they say that mammals evolved on the planet long after the dinosaurs were. They didn't coexist according to evolutionists. But in China, they found a fossil of a mammal, and in its belly was a small dinosaur. Probably its last meal before the flood of Noah buried the thing. And it causes them to do this. rethinking the Mesozoic. Oh, they've got to rethink their theory a little bit. Well, you know what they'll do. They'll just modify it a little bit and keep on going. Keep pushing that evolution theory because God didn't create anything and you're living a lie if you don't believe naturalism, evolutionism, determinism, materialism, moral relativism are all just truth. Isn't it so funny? Now here's what they're going to do. They're just going to modify their theory a little bit and keep on pushing it. As everything is okay. It's always okay. You see, there's never a problem for evolution theory. They just adjust the theory a little bit and keep on going. It's never a problem for evolution theory. Never. There's no problems with evolution theory. We just modify the theory and keep on going. Here's an article on CNN.com. They found a dinosaur print at the Goddard Space Flight Center on the ground. And there it is, you can see it. It's a theropod dinosaur footprint. And here's the mud rock or whatever kind of stone this is. And they say this is millions of years old. They call it from the Cretaceous, they say. Now, funny thing is, it hasn't eroded away. Look at that. Now, you mean to tell me that in 60 million years or so, this rock has not eroded away because of wind and rain and water flowing over it in 60 plus million years? No, my friends, this dinosaur print isn't 60 million years old. It's probably a few thousand years old. I find it so funny that these secular guys, these goons who believe in evolution and claim it's the truth, find things like this and then they go away scratching their head how come it's not eroded away. And it's right there on the surface, a dinosaur footprint, right on the surface. Not eroded away. Now see, they would have you believe that in 60 million years, quite a bit of erosion is going to take place. That's what they believe, and I would say so too. I would say in 60 million years, a lot of erosion is going to happen. There's not going to be any dinosaur footprints on the surface of the Earth. They didn't have to dig down for this. It's right there. There's not going to be any dinosaur footprints on the surface of the Earth where there's dirt around it and grass growing. See the grass? Grass, look. It's not going to be there for 60 million years. But these guys, they believe it is. Isn't that funny? That's humorous. 60 million years ago, they say. Right. You know what's funny? This unimaginable stretching of the real history of the Earth that these guys do, these evolutionist kind. They stretch the life of this planet to an unfathomable amount of time. It's thousands of times older in their mind than it really is. Many, many thousands of times older than it actually is. Isn't that funny? Just thought I'd share that with you. Supposedly millions and millions and millions and millions of years old. It's right there on the surface where grass is growing and stuff. Look. And it didn't wear down. It didn't wear away. It didn't erode. In all those millions of years. No, I tell you what happened. That dinosaur stepped there just a few thousand years ago. But these guys can't see the truth. They're blinded.
David Reeves. I like to think that he's the new Ken Ham or Kent Hovind, even though his name doesn't start with a K. Now I know these videos of his that I'm responding to now are a little bit older, but I still think that these little bits of anti-science are still worth taking a look at. So let's talk about dinosaurs.
Can I be a Bible-believing Christian and believe in dinosaurs? You know, the kind of dinosaurs we see in the movies? Right, you know, those scary ones that lived millions of years ago, that killed everything in sight, and then inexplicably turned into birds after all dying in a meteor explosion.
It's not inexplicable. We have explanations for it. Explanations which people like you will readily reject without completely understanding it. It wasn't magic and it wasn't sudden. It was a small change after a small change for an immensely long period of time.
Of all the ridiculous things that I've heard evolutionists say since I've been doing Christian creationist apologetics since about 2007, this "they just don't understand it" is probably the silliest mantra that you guys repeat. It just becomes an instant facepalm for me. You guys want to believe so desperately that if we only understood it, maybe then we'd believe it. The truth is we do understand it. What you don't understand, and you can't accept, it seems, is that we do understand it. We don't believe it, but we understand it. We probably understand it better than you. It's been my experience that most creationists understand evolution theory better than evolutionists.
It wasn't magic and it wasn't sudden. It was a small change after a small change for an immensely long period of time, and there's plenty of evidence for it.
There isn't a shred of evidence for it, nor is there a biological mechanism for it. 90 years of investigating random genetic mutation, a million studies, enough papers that if they were stacked on top of each other would reach 2 or 3 stories tall, have all refuted the idea that mutations build upon prior mutations to generate the information necessary to transform the anatomy of one kind of organism so that another one comes into being. There isn't a shred of scientific evidence for that. That's your faith. That's your religion. It certainly isn't science. What it is a failed philosophy. Fossil record doesn't even provide evidence for it. The vast majority of eminent scientists have written in their own books that the fossil record doesn't show clear evidence of evolutionary transition. The two-faced nature of these scientists is this. They'll tell the general public and they'll tell students in a classroom there's plenty of evidence for it, but when they write books expected to be read by their peers, they make those astonishing admissions. It's those admissions that you, anti-creationists, refuse to accept.
And they didn't all die in a meteor explosion.
None of them did. That's why we have a fossil record. We have 1,800 meters, on average, covering the continents of sedimentary material, littered with rapidly buried creatures which have become fossils, a one-time event that can only have been caused by the Noahic flood. How do we know? Well, for one thing, the waters of the earth don't have enough concentrated minerals in them to create a fossil record. Look at the oceans today. They're clean. They don't have the mineral content necessary to create fossils. But the waters that flooded the earth coming from within the earth, pulling massive amounts of minerals out of the earth into the waters that flooded the earth, would have the mineral content necessary for permineralization to create fossils. So the fossil record can only be explained by the Noahic flood. The waters of the earth, now or in your imaginary time in the past, have never had the concentrated minerals necessary to turn animals into rock.
Yes, there was a mass extinction event that was caused by a meteor impact, but that didn't cause every species of dinosaur to go extinct, just a lot of them, and a lot of other organisms. It was a catastrophe, but it wasn't magic that targeted the dinosaurs and only the dinosaurs.
What are you talking about? Magic that targeted the dinosaurs? Who believes that? Creationists don't believe that. I have no idea what you're talking about now. You sound really weird. It's kind of spooky.
I know this may be simple stuff that I'm explaining right now, but...
You don't seem to be explaining anything. You're talking about some crazy, nonsensical ideas. I don't think you know what you're talking about. Creationists don't believe that all of the dinosaurs were wiped out in the flood. They believe only those creatures on the ark survived. Everything else was wiped out. The Word of God says all creatures that have the breath of life in them, everything that creeped on the earth, perished in the flood. We have the physical evidence for that. It's 1,800 meters deep, and it's filled with every kind of living thing that's ever walked the earth.
Creationists like David here don't always have a very nuanced view of archaeology, science, pretty much anything that disagrees with them.
Well, there you go. That's exactly the opposite of the truth. I hear this from evolutionists a lot too. The truth is, the typical layperson evolutionist doesn't have much knowledge about sedimentology, geology, cosmology, astronomy, genetics, or any other fields of science that they talk about and claim the scientists who are creationists or laypersons who are creationists are ignorant about. The truth is, it's your camp that's typically ignorant. And you know what I find funny? That I have to educate evolutionists about these things while I'm debating them. That shouldn't be so. I shouldn't have to educate them about that. Now, the reason that I have to do that is because they don't actually believe science. They believe their philosophy and how they personally interpret the facts. But they don't believe the science. And so you have to educate them about real science, because they've replaced science with their pseudoscience, with the philosophy. For example, they refuse to believe that sedimentary strata are formed in groups horizontally by rapidly moving water, with clear distinct boundaries and absence of erosion between them. And this is well established by hydrologists and sedimentologists all over the world. But when you discuss the flood of Noah with an evolutionist and explain to them how the sedimentary strata of the earth were created, because they refuse to believe that the flood of Noah did it, they refuse to believe the science. And so they will not believe that sedimentary strata are formed together horizontally, with one strata being on top of the other with clear distinct boundaries, particle size distribution, and formed horizontally, not vertically. But they won't accept that, because that means the earth was flooded, and they can't accept that. So they refuse to believe the science. See how that works? That's why creationists have to educate evolutionists while they're debating them. Because evolutionists refuse to accept science because it doesn't fit your crazy worldview.
I've been on paleontological digs, and I've dug up the bones of these monsters that you see in the movies. They were real.
Here he says that he's been on paleontological digs, and maybe he has, I don't know, but make no mistake, he's not a paleontologist. No paleontologist would say the things that he's saying.
We hear this one from evolutionists all the time too. No scientist would say the things you guys say. There are thousands of scientists who don't believe evolution theory, or are proponents of intelligent design, or are creationists. In fact, there are probably thousands upon thousands of university professors who doubt or don't believe evolution theory at all. Many of them are intelligent design proponents or creationists and simply can't say so because they know that they'll be canned from their jobs if they say that they doubt evolution theory or that they're supporters of intelligent design or creation. The man on your screen now is Kurt P. Wise, Harvard University educated paleontologist and geologist. In fact, his education is so high that Richard Dawkins mused that he's astonished that Kurt Wise is a young Earth creationist because he studied under the famous Stephen Jay Gould, who was once the world's foremost paleontologist at Harvard University. By the way, Dr. Wise explains with geology how the flood of Noah took place and the evidence for it. Here's another paleontologist, Evolution News. Wikipedia erases paleontologist Gunter Beckley. This was published in 2017. Gunter Beckley is a distinguished paleontologist specializing in fossil dragonflies, exquisitely preserved in amber for tens of millions of years, allegedly. After revealing his support for the theory of intelligent design, he was pushed out of as curator of the State Museum of Natural History in Stuttgart, Germany.
And his ministry's website says that he has documented field experience in paleontology, but I don't know where the hell this is documented. I mean, in this video, he claims that he's been on 2 paleontological digs in Kansas where he found clams or something, but that's just about it. Oh wait, I see, I get it now. It says here that his exciting life and world travels are documented on his ministry's Facebook page. So I guess he's a Facebook scientist.
So he's documented his experience, probably volunteering, on paleontological digs so that he could learn. And you call him a Facebook scientist, and you are a YouTube scientist? Is that how that works? So when is the last time you actually went into the field and worked on a paleontological dig? Never?
There's a few things that we hear about these creatures that are not based on fact. So let's see if I can go over a few. Number 1. When I dig up the bones, I've never yet found a date stamped on one saying deposited 65 million years BC.
And here you show just how unscientific you are. Sure, there's no literal timestamp, but you can't be ignorant of the fact that we do have methods of dating fossils. You're trying to make yourself seem like a scientist by saying, oh, I go on to paleontological digs, I dig up these bones myself, but anybody that actually knows what they're talking about would understand radiometric dating.
Well, I know that you and all the evolutionists camp rely heavily on radiometric dating, as though this is the end-all for young Earth creationists, but it's not. Radiometric dating is filled with assumptions. It's actually based upon assumptions, and for this reason we know that it can't empirically provide an age for anything. There's lots of problems with it. Now, the science of measuring the isotopes in the rocks is very good. That's very high-tech science. That's good. But the conclusions that evolutionists come to are based on assumptions. Let me explain one of the major problems with radiometric dating. It works like this. You have a parent isotope, and it decays into a daughter isotope over time. Now, what scientists do is they measure how much of the parent isotope is present in a rock and how much of the daughter isotope is present in a rock, and then they make a ratio out of that. Now, that ratio tells them, based on the rate at which the material decays, its half-life, tells them how old the rock is. Now, that sounds all well and good, but there's major problems with that. And here's what those problems are. This is one of those problems. Firstly, when was that strata in which that rock that you dated formed? Nobody can say. You can't say with empirical science that we can date that strata and say that it was formed X million years ago or X thousand years ago. There's no way to know. So that rock was transported by moving water and sealed in a strata, and that's when your dating method begins. But you don't know when that is. How much of the parent isotope was present when that strata formed? You can't possibly know. How much daughter isotope was present when that strata formed? It's impossible to know. We can't even make a guess. So the problem is this. Water washes radioisotopes into rocks and out of rocks constantly. The older you believe the rock is, the more watery events it's been has experienced, and the greater the problem is. If you believe the rock is 10,000 years old, you have a problem. If you believe it's 10 million years old, you have a tremendous problem. If you believe it's 100 million years old, you have an enormous problem, because water washes radioisotopes into and out of rocks. All rocks, except rocks like obsidian, which is basically natural glass, are porous, and water will wash into those and out. You will add isotopes to them or remove them, or both, over time. So how much water, how much has the parent isotope been added to or removed by water over time? You can't really know. It may have been 1% of it, 50%, or all of it. Just can't know. And the daughter isotope likewise. It may be 1%, 50%, or 100% of the daughter isotope has been added to or removed from that rock by water over time. So this is an enormous problem for radiometric dating. You see, this is why that communities and governments discuss the problem of materials being in our drinking water, like lead and uranium and other isotopes like that, because water moves stuff through the earth. And that's why you have problems with uranium and lead in drinking water around the world. It didn't get there magically. It got there because water moved it there. And it does this inside rocks as well. So the problem is this. You have 100% possibility of water adding or removing 100%, 99%, 98%, 96%, 90%, 80%, 50%, 10%, 1% of the parent isotope either into or out of that rock over time. And the same is true for the daughter isotope. The variability of this is enormous. 100% times 10,000% times 100% times 1,000,000% times 100% equals 100 million percent. This is a 100 million percent error in measuring the isotopes to find out how old the rock is. A potential of 100 million percent error. What if water added all of the parent isotope, and when you measure and see how much daughter isotope is present, your belief about how old that rock is completely wrong, because water actually added all of the parent isotope to a rock that had some of the daughter isotope, and none of the parent isotope was turned into the daughter isotope in that rock. That's possible, but you can't possibly know. What if you measure the amount of parent isotope in that rock and you find X amount of daughter isotope, but the problem is this: 40% of the daughter isotope that's in that rock now was added by water since the rock formed. Is that possible? Absolutely possible. What if 75% of the daughter isotope that was originally in that rock has now been washed out, and you measure the rock and say the ratio from parent to daughter is this, but you're missing 75% of the daughter isotope because water has washed it out or added it? You see, there's no way to know. This is a 100%, 100 million percent potential error. This means radiometric dating is not an empirical science. And there are lots of problems with it when it comes to assumptions. Evolutionist scientists themselves have acknowledged these problems for a long time. They just don't like talking about it publicly. For example, E.H. Anders, professor of materials, University of London, head of Department of Materials at Queen's College, in his book God, Science, and Evolution says, whatever the figures arrived at by the dating tests, they are weeded out before publication in science journals. If they do not accord with the preconceived dates assigned to the evolutionary geologic column. And J.E. O'Rourke, American Journal of Science, wrote in 1976, the intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning and the use of rocks to date fossils and fossils to date rocks. And then, of course, we have Richard L. Mauger, Associate Professor of Geology, East Carolina University. He writes, in general, dates in the correct ballpark are assumed to be correct and are published, but those in disagreement with other data are seldom published, nor are discrepancies fully explained. So you see, what scientists do is this. Dating methods produce a metric, that is, a variety of dates. When scientists date a rock, they'll get maybe 3 to 5, 10 different dates for that rock. The one they pick is the one they think is the age of the rock, and they discard the rest. I'm not kidding you. That's exactly how it works. They even employ what are called fudge factors. Radiometric dating is not empirical science. It does not prove the age of a rock. Now, science has proved with other methods that the rocks of the Earth cannot be millions of years old. For example, Dr. Russell Humphreys and his science, with another group of other scientists, sent examples of zircon crystals to various secular labs, mainstream labs around the world, and asked them date these by telling us how much helium there is in the rock. Tell us how much helium is there. And the labs sent back the data. We believe the rock to be X million years old because of the helium in it, and this is how much helium is in those zircons. But then they asked those same labs to conduct another study to tell them what is the rate at which the helium escapes from the zircons. And they did their studies and found out it was X rate. So, using the rate at which the helium escapes from the zircon crystals and how much helium is present in the zircon crystals, guess what? The age of those crystals, according to this dating method, is precisely 6,000 years. So, if the zircon crystals were even 10,000 years old, there would be no helium in them, because helium is a very tiny, slippery molecule. It slips right out of rocks. It escapes rapidly. And the rocks of the Earth cannot have all the helium in them they do if they were millions of years old. Not even if they were 1 million or a quarter of a million years old. The age of the rocks, the zircons, measured by how much helium is in them and how rapidly the helium escapes from them, naturally, gives us an age of precisely 6,000 years. Isn't that astonishing? And guess what? There are no assumptions employed in this dating method. None. Unlike radiometric dating with parent and daughter isotopes, there are no assumptions involved here at all. Now, here's a list of scientific studies conducted by scientists that verify exactly what I just told you. Radioisotopes do not prove the age of the Earth as being millions of years old. I know that you and your camp love to harp on that and claim that every creationist is flat wrong about the age of the Earth because science proves them wrong, but it does no such thing. Science confirms a young Earth. We don't need assumptions to come to conclusions in science. When you employ assumptions, you're basing your idea on your paradigm, what you believe is true. We don't need to know what you believe is true to employ science. And when we take what the evolutionist believes to be true out of science and let the actual science speak for itself, the age of the Earth suddenly becomes 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Isn't that amazing? And guess what? That's real science. And there are no assumptions involved. Not even the creationist's assumption of how old the rocks are. Simply science.
In fact, what's getting a lot of attention within the scientific community these days is the discovery of soft tissue inside some of these bones. Now, this soft tissue should not even last for 100,000 years, much less the millions required for evolution.
What makes you think that this can't last millions of years under any circumstances?
Science. Chemistry. You've heard of forensics, haven't you? You know that scientists all the time examine dead bodies that have been in the woods or in a culvert somewhere, for 10 years or 50 years, or archaeologists dig up human remains that have been in the ground for 1,000 or 1,500, 2,500 years.
I mean, are we going to make observations and form tests to try to see what's going on? Or are we just going to jump to conclusions based on our bias?
No, we're not going to jump to conclusions based on our paradigm. That's what evolutionists do. That's why I pointed you to forensics. You've heard of it. Have you ever watched CSI Miami? You could have learned this from a TV show, much less real scientists. Surely you haven't reached your age and not heard about forensics.
Now, all of these examples of soft tissue are conventionally dated at tens to hundreds of millions of years old. And yet observational science tells us that soft tissue can't last that long. You still have to fight with chemistry. Scientists have conducted reliable, repeatable experiments to figure out just how long soft tissues will last. And the results aren't good for those who believe in millions of years. Although they have only had a few years to run the test, they're already running into big problems. They can't adequately explain how these proteins could last for more than thousands of years. Now, research shows that soft tissue can't last even 1 million years, let alone tens to hundreds of millions of years. But this same research shows that soft tissues can certainly last a few thousand years. That would be consistent with the biblical dates for the global flood described in Genesis. Breaking new evidence doesn't confirm a secular timeline. It confirms a biblical timeline. I'm David Reeves. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God.
And where are your citations for any of this research? What makes you think that there's absolutely no possible way for soft tissue to be preserved? Had they tested every possible explanation?
Now, I hear this from evolutionists a lot too. Well, gee, they didn't test every possible explanation. There could be some mystical, mysterious one that's eluded us, and that fixes the problem for us. Do evolutionists test every possible explanation? Not hardly. The evolutionist desperately wants to believe that because the evidence is what it is, there must be some mystical, unknown fix for the problem, and that solves the problem for them. They bring this argument up against actual, observable, testable repeatable science. Because the evidence disagrees with their ideas, well, there's just something out there in the netherworld that solves it for us, and you didn't find it. That means you creationists are wrong.
And this distinction between historical science and observational science, this is a distinction that no actual genuine scientist would ever make.
But many do. Evolutionists hate it, I know. Are you telling me that we can observe what took place 1,000,000 years ago? Or 100 million years ago? There's no distinction between what's observable and what's not observable? If it's not observable, we can only make an inference based on the data, but we can't observe it. That doesn't mean we can't do science about it. But your argument that this is not a scientific idea is fallacious, unless you're going to tell me that you can observe what happened 1,000,000 years ago.
This is just another kind of convoluted way in which creationists will readily dismiss and ignore all of the evidence that goes against their crazy ideas.
Crazy ideas. Let's see who has the crazy ideas. You evolutionists believe there was a dot that exploded in space that had no cause, but it's its own cause. And this dot, when it exploded, it caused matter to expel everywhere in the universe, eventually organizing itself into Beethoven and space probes and cell phones. That's what you believe. And you guys believe that rock soup is going to organize itself into the most complex things known to exist to man. And it's going to develop its own algorithms and information processing and linguistics characteristics. Because molecules can do that sort of stuff, right? And you guys believe that random damage events to genetic information in the genome of a living creature is going to write volumes of complex specified information that's going to design astonishingly complex and functional, intricately designed features which seem more complex the closer we look at them. People don't naturally believe those crazy things. Evolutionists impose this on themselves because they need to believe it. And people who believe in evolution, who've been beguiled to believe in evolution, they believe it because they haven't actually thought about it. But once the absurdity of this is explained to them, they stop believing those things. The only people that hold to these things, that is, even when they've seen the arguments against it and the ridiculousness of it, and continue to claim that it's true, are people who need to believe it, because their worldview depends on it. You've got to explain your existence some kind of way, and believing in the unbelievable is how you think you can do it.
And since I guess I'm gonna have to be the one that actually uses science, here is a scientific journal article that, and I quote, shows empirically that structure-function relationships at the molecular level could contribute to selective preservation in fossilized vertebrate remains across geological time. And further, here is an article explaining that chelators from iron is a probable explanation as to how it was preserved for so long, and gave an experiment that showed that this does work with ostrich blood.
The problem is that when people like yourself, evolutionists, speak of their science papers that supposedly show that something can happen the way they think, they're not showing that something like that can happen. They're speculating, and the speculations don't hold up to science. What's been discovered are osteocytes. These cells and their canaliculi cannot have been preserved by iron. What they won't tell you is that it can't happen. The evidence that it can't happen. For example, experiments to demonstrate that iron could preserve soft tissue for millions of years have shown that it could preserve them for up to 200 times their normal lifespan after an organism's death. That's not sufficient to preserve the soft tissue for millions of years. That amounts to possibly 2 years. That's not millions of years. After an organism's death, its protein molecules tend to denature, that is, they unravel, and further degrade the materials that they're in, and they cause the degeneration of other proteins. The denatured hemoglobin and proteolytic enzymes is part of the problem. Denatured hemoglobin and ferritin can no longer hold on to their iron atoms. So how can they preserve them if they're going to release their iron atoms? The iron in the blood, therefore, will not be able to preserve the soft tissue for a vast period of time. Schweitzer stated in her work, we also know that iron hinders just about every technique we have to detect proteins. So iron looks like it may be both a mechanism for preservation and the reason why we've had problems finding and analyzing proteins that are preserved. So you see, it's possible that iron can short-term, for a very short period of time, up to maybe 2 years, help preserve soft tissues. But it's also creating a problem that helps destroy those tissues at the same time. Now, many of the still fresh fossilized biochemicals described in the literature do not show evidence of nearby iron. Therefore, iron preservation of the organism's blood and not the environment must be necessary for soft tissue preservation. But the iron in the blood cannot preserve the soft tissue over deep time. Researchers have encountered bone cells called osteocytes locked inside bones, dinosaur bones, including Triceratops horn cone. These cells have fine thread-like extensions that penetrate the bone matrix material and through tiny tunnels called canaliculi. And they are as small as 0.0004 millimeters in diameter, really tiny. However, blood cannot have passed into these microscopic tunnels and concentrate the iron there to preserve the tissues. Think about that. These canaliculi have been preserved with the osteocytes in dinosaur bones. But you see, they are too fine for blood to bring enough iron into them to preserve them. The cohesive factor of liquids would prevent the blood from crawling into these tunnels, especially after death. So the iron cannot concentrate in a sufficient amount to preserve the osteocytes and their canaliculi. Do you understand? Iron can't have been the reason why this soft tissue has been preserved for millions of years. Because those little microscopic tubes are too tiny for enough blood to pass up into them to provide enough iron to preserve that tissue. It's not going to be sufficient. On top of that, when the organism dies, the blood's not going to flow anymore. And it's not going to bring any more iron to the canaliculi. See, so evolutionist scientists always provide speculations and say, this is how it happened, and this is how it must have happened. But if you examine the evidence, you'll find it just didn't happen that way. There is no scientific evidence that iron could have possibly preserved the soft tissues over millions of years. It's an absurd idea, if for no other reason than the iron helps to denaturize the protein molecules themselves, helps them unfold. And if that happens, you will not get stretchy soft tissue, ever.
So, according to actual science, soft tissue can be preserved for millions of years.
It shows no such thing. Why in the world would you provide a reference to a science paper that explains that soft tissue could be preserved for up to 2 years by the blood iron, when we're talking about millions of years? Is that your idea of science? You're willing to extrapolate that soft tissue can be preserved for millions of years, tens of millions of years, because an experiment showed that ostrich blood can be preserved for 2 years? Is that your idea of science? Oh, wait a minute. That's an evolutionist's idea of science, right?
And in case you don't get the point yet, if ever we can't explain something in science, then instead of just jumping to wild conclusions that we already made beforehand, we make more observations and we make tests and experiments and try to find out what's going on. That's how science actually works.
Well, that's how science should work, but you've just demonstrated that that's not how evolutionists do science. Because you have extrapolated that because an experiment, observable, testable, real science, shows that ostrich blood could be preserved for 200 times the normal length of time after death, which is about 2 years, into the idea that soft tissue in dinosaur bones could be preserved for tens of millions of years. That's not observation. That's extrapolation. That's speculation of an outrageous nature. That's not science. That's going into la-la land.
While we know that dinosaurs really did eat other animals, because we sometimes find these other creatures in their stomachs, it doesn't mean that they were ferocious creatures. In fact, sperm whales and warthogs and other creatures have long, sharp teeth that look remarkably similar to the T-Rex, but they aren't carnivorous killing machines. Okay, so you still probably wouldn't have wanted a pair of velociraptors as pets, but trying to describe their behavior from a bunch of bones takes quite a bit of speculation.
This is kinda true. We don't know exactly how all dinosaurs behaved, and for movies and stuff, we definitely do have to take some liberties. But what we find can tell us a good deal about how they behaved. I think what he's trying to get at is that everyone, including scientists, maybe, they just make huge assumptions and guesses without the facts to back it up. But that's not really how it works.
Oh, but that's exactly how it works when it comes to evolutionists and their pseudoscience, as you just proved. Speculating that dinosaur soft tissue could be preserved for tens of millions of years because an experiment showed that iron in the blood of an ostrich could preserve its soft tissue for up to 2 years. Is that a huge extrapolation? Is that a huge assumption, like you just mentioned? Don't you think it is?
I mean, hell, as far as the T-Rex goes, you gave us the evidence yourself. Teeth, and the animals in their stomachs. Teeth can tell us a lot about how an animal behaves, and their diet, regardless of how similar you think they look to other animals, Mr. Not a Real Paleontologist.
Well, listen, Mr. Not a Real Paleontologist. Dogs have teeth that are really good at tearing and biting into things and cracking bones that are smaller than their own as well. But that doesn't mean that dogs are naturally a vicious killer or carnivorous by nature or design. People make pets out of them. What it means is that a dog in the wild who needs to survive will resort to carnivorism. Couldn't dinosaurs be the same way? Well, they could be, logically, but not in your worldview, because your worldview is predicated on the idea that organisms survive by eating and killing each other for the most part, especially if they have these teeth. It's a theory of death. Death brought everything into the world instead of life, bringing life into the world. So you believe that dead, inanimate matter organized itself into the most complex thing known to exist, biological systems, by death. You believe death brought everything into the world. You believe death brought life into the world. Creationists don't believe that. We believe life, the breath of God, brought life into the world. We hold to and believe in the law of biogenesis. Life begets life, but you believe dirt begets life. That's not scientific. Do we have to mention all the incredible problems and impossibilities of abiogenesis? Should we save that for another time? What this means is the physical feature of the organism doesn't fit the evolution theory. Now these are the teeth of dogs. If you'll notice, the occlusion is proper for providing better ability to crush bone. T-Rex don't have teeth like these. A dog can easily break a small bone with its teeth because of the occlusion of its molars. T-Rex has no molars. It has no proper occlusion for breaking bones. Certainly not big ones. Now it may be that T-Rex did gnaw on creatures that had big bones in the past. That's possible. That doesn't mean they were crushing big bones. That simply couldn't have happened. They would simply break their teeth off in their mouth. They don't have the teeth like a dog. Without these kind of teeth, they could not have been animals that gnawed on large bones to make them part of their diet, which is what evolutionists believe. So here again we see evolutionist pseudoscience because the physical evidence doesn't match the theory. So let's imagine what would happen to T-Rex's teeth if it tried to crush a bone this size. Well, because bones are round typically, and because of the shape of T-Rex's teeth, the bone would simply force its way between the tips of the teeth, pry them apart, possibly break them. Now, it could possibly break the bones of a smaller animal, like a goat. Bones that size would simply fit between their teeth, but it simply did not have the dentition or the type of teeth necessary to crush large bones. It simply wouldn't work. Can't be so. And this is why we see evolutionists do pseudoscience. Because evolutionists have written in science papers that T-Rex had the ability to crush large bones, even though it had the kind of teeth that it did. Why? Because that's their evolution paradigm. Because evolutionists believe that this kind of teeth evolved because creatures needed them to be predators. And because of their a priori belief in evolution theory, they conduct pseudoscience, and they write in science papers absolutely stupid, idiotic ideas, like T-Rex had the kind of teeth that would have allowed it to crush large bones, which is anti-science. There is no animal on the earth today that has the kind of teeth that T-Rex does that gnaws on large bones. Not one species. None have ever existed, because it does not have the teeth necessary to crush large bones. And this is just one of countless examples of why we can know that evolutionism is anti-science, pseudoscience, and a denial of science. It's in fact the stupidest idea ever put forth in the world, second only to the idea that God does not exist. In this science paper, the authors write, most carnivorous mammals can pulverize skeletal elements by generating tooth pressures between occluding teeth that exceed cortical bone shear strength, thereby permitting access to marrow and phosphatic salts. Conversely, carnivorous reptiles have non-occluding dentitions that engendered negligible bone damage during feeding. As a result, most reptilian predators can only consume bones in their entirety. Nevertheless, North American tyrannosaurids, including the giant 13-meter theropod dinosaur Tyrannosaurus rex, stand out for habitually biting deep into bones, pulverizing and digesting them. How this mammal-like capacity was possible, absent dental occlusion, is unknown. So you see, they're perplexed by it because science shows that teeth like this aren't sufficient for it, but they'll write in this very same paper that it happened anyway, because their evolution theory requires it to be true. This is how evolutionists engage in pseudoscience. Evolution theory is not science, nor is it scientific. It's anti-science. It's brainwashing people to believe stupid things, and people go right on believing it's true because they need to believe it. If we were to be honest with the actual evidence, we would not say the things that these evolutionists say, because they're stupid.
So, number 3, you might have heard that the last dinos went extinct millions of years ago, but dating methods show huge discrepancies in the alleged ages of dinosaur remains. There's something going on here. Recently, a dozen carefully collected and preserved samples of fossils and dinosaur remains were sent in for testing. Now, measurable amounts of carbon-14 were found in every single one. The maximum limit for C14 is about 80 to 100,000 years. Maximum. The current evolutionary theories need at least 50 million years for dinosaurs. So maybe it's time for a reevaluation.
Alright, cool, and where's your citation for this study? None? No, don't have one? No citation? Alright, fine. I guess I'll go looking for this study on my own, but you're really not making this easy for me.
Oh, boo-hoo. Evolutionists are always expecting creationists to do their homework for them. They won't believe anything. They won't believe anything unless the creationist provides science papers. And then when they do, and they read them to the evolutionist doesn't believe them, even if they're from their own camp.
Okay, so the closest thing that I could find...
Are you kidding me? You try to do scientific research on the internet with a phone? This is what I use. Maybe you should upgrade. You might be able to find better results.
...was this study. If you could call it that. It's not actually an article, but a presentation, I guess?
Excellent. You actually found the presentation. Good for you.
They claim that they went all across the country, as well as to Asia and Europe, dug up some dinosaur bones, dug up some coal, and dug up some diamonds. They dated all of them, compared the dates, and found that there was enough carbon-14 in the dinosaur bones to date them between 22,000 and 40,000 years old, younger than all of the rest of the materials dated. Okay, let's ignore the fact that they knew that carbon dating is unreliable for anything older than around 50,000 years or so.
But that's irrelevant. The point is, there could be no carbon-14 in it whatsoever, because the half-life of carbon-14 is about 1,576 years. If there was a mass of carbon-14 the size of the Earth, every atom of it would be gone within 1 million years. So it doesn't matter that we don't use carbon-14 to date things that are, what you believe, millions of years old. That's irrelevant. What's relevant is this. If there is carbon-14 found in it, and if that carbon-14 was originally part of the animal when it died, there could be no carbon-14 in that bone at all if it's 65 million years old. Not even if it's 1 million years old.
Instead, let's look at what they didn't do. As far as I can tell, they gave no explanation as to how they determined that these fossils were from Jurassic or Cretaceous animals.
It didn't take me long to find it. Evolutionists do terrible research because they're not interested in finding out about anything that argues against anything they believe, so they'd rather pretend it doesn't exist. But here's the information you seek. What type of dinosaur, where it was excavated, and by whom?
They didn't use any other method of dating, which could have given them an older date, and they didn't date anything around the fossils, or check for index fossils.
Why would they need to? So here's some problems with your idea of radiometric dating. From E.H. Andrews, Professor of Materials, University of London, Head of Department of Materials at Queen's College, he wrote, "Whatever the figures arrived by the dating tests, they are weeded out before publication in scientific journals. If they do not accord with the preconceived dates assigned to the evolutionary geologic column." So this is picking and choosing, you see. And also, from L. Mauger, Associate Professor of Geology, East Carolina University, he writes, "In general, dates in the correct ballpark are assumed to be correct and are published, but those in disagreement with other data are seldom published, nor are discrepancies fully explained." So evolutionists pick the date that they like because it's whatever date fits their idea of the geologic column relating to whatever it is that they want to date. That's called picking and choosing. See, radiometric dating produces a variety of dates whenever you date something. That's why it's called radiometric. It produces a metric of dates. And the evolutionists picked the date of maybe 3 or 5 different dates provided by the dating method and choose the one that fits closest to their paradigm of how old they believe something is. Is that real science? That's not scientific, is it? But here's the part that I wanted you to see. The intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning in the use of rocks to date fossils and fossils to date rocks. J.E. O'Rourke, The American Journal of Science, 1976. Your idea of index fossils is not scientific. Evolutionists believe that an organism lived because of its particular features. They believe it lived at a specific time in history, according to the evolution theory, and that's how they apply a date for it. Obviously, fish existed prior to the amphibian tetrapods because they believe amphibian tetrapods evolved from fish. So, if they find an amphibian tetrapod fossil in the rocks, they assume it was within this period of time in the past. And if they find a creature that they believe lived later, like a theropod dinosaur, because they believe they evolved later because of their evolution theory, they apply a later date to it. See? That's not scientific. That's based on an assumption. That's a paradigm talking, not science. And it's called circular reasoning. And that's why J.E. O'Rourke of the American Journal of Science wrote in 1976, "The intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning in the use of rocks to date fossils and fossils to date rocks."
Even if these actually are dinosaur bones, which they very well may be, I don't really know, the results mean nothing, and that's because you can only radiocarbon date organic material, that is, material that has carbon in it. Now, I hear what you're saying from across the screen. You're saying, Heath, but bones are organic material, and yeah, you're right, but fossils are not bones. But instead they were bones, but they have since been petrified, or turned into rocks. See, the bones actually do decay, go away, melt, I don't know, but there are minerals that are coming in and replacing that bone. So what you have are no longer bone, but instead rocks that have replaced the bone. And these minerals are not organic, and you cannot radiocarbon date them. And sure, you may find trace amounts of carbon-14, but that's because carbon-14 is everywhere, and they can come into pretty much anything from a number of ways, not the least of which is contamination. So yeah, you can find carbon-14 in fossils and in pretty much everything else. See, we don't claim that there's no carbon-14 in anything that's too old, just that there's not enough to reliably date it using this method.
Well, now you said, I think, the only smart thing I've heard you say. It is possible that the process of permineralization, that is the formation of the fossil, the replacement of the organic material with minerals to create a fossil, could be a source of carbon-14. So I do not use any longer this carbon-14 found in dinosaur bones argument. I think creationists should be very skeptical of it. I had the man who ran the study that you mentioned that we were talking about earlier, where he said carbon-14 was found in dinosaur bones. That was the earliest study that has done it. He spent numerous emails back and forth with me trying to convince me that the carbon-14 found in the dinosaur samples was original, that it was a part of the animal's bone when the animal died. He could not do that. He could not convince me. None of the arguments that he posed provided me empirical evidence, any way for us to know for sure that the carbon-14 found in dinosaur fossils was not added to it during the process of permineralization. I argued with him about it over and over in emails back and forth. He was very adamant that it was originally part of the animal's bones and that we could know it, but he never once was able to provide me empirical evidence that the carbon-14 found in the dinosaur bones was not added during permineralization, but was in fact originally part of the animal's body when it died. So I am not convinced that carbon-14 found in dinosaur bones is absolutely legitimate. It may be, there may be some information that I'm missing, but I have not seen empirical evidence that proves to us that the carbon-14 is not an example of something that has entered into the fossil through permineralization. However, carbon-14 has also been found in diamonds. Creationists have sent diamonds at their very great expense to mainstream labs to have them tested for carbon-14, and the labs detected measurable amounts of carbon-14. There can be no carbon-14 in a diamond if it's a billion plus years old, which evolutionists claim diamonds are. That's impossible. Diamonds cannot be contaminated with carbon-14 because they are the hardest substance in the world. Nothing will enter into a diamond. You cannot get the carbon-14 to enter into a diamond. So, the carbon-14 found in the diamond is evidence that the diamond is not a billion years old. In fact, cannot even be millions of years old, but can only be thousands of years old. Now, the problem gets even murkier. And let me explain. Diamonds are sometimes used by accelerated mass spectrometer labs to calibrate their machines because they know that there will be no carbon-14 in a diamond. So they use the diamond to help calibrate the machine. They put a substance in which there can be no carbon-14 so that when they run a test, if they find carbon-14, they know that their machine needs cleaning, that it's contaminated. The problem is that they clean the machine and then they run a test with diamonds in it and find that it has carbon-14 in it, which you can't have. They remove the diamond, they clean the equipment, they put another diamond in it, they run the test again, and they still find carbon-14. So it can't be that the carbon-14 was contamination from the environment. What they're detecting is carbon-14 in the diamond and not from the environment, not contamination. This is verification that carbon-14 is actually in the diamond and it's not contamination that's entered into the equipment that requires thorough cleaning. So carbon-14 found in diamonds by even secular labs is powerful evidence that diamonds are not millions of years old, not even many, many thousands of years old. So I'm with you when it comes to the carbon-14 in fossils thing. I'm not completely convinced that that's not contamination. However, carbon-14 has been found in diamonds, and the tests rerun, and that cannot be true if the diamond is of vast age. Carbon-14 has been found in diamonds, verifying that diamonds are not many millions of years old, which verifies that all the geological processes that produced those diamonds did not take place over periods of millions of years, verifying that the Earth is in fact young.
See, we don't claim that there's no carbon-14 in anything that's too old, just that there's not enough to reliably date it using this method.
Well, the problem is there cannot be any carbon-14 in a diamond, and the tests have been rerun and carbon-14 found again. Diamonds used to calibrate accelerated mass spectrometers have verified the carbon-14 found during the calibration process is actually in the diamond, and it was enough to be detected. There can be no carbon-14 whatsoever in a diamond, non-detectable at all, if the diamond is even 1 million years old. Not any detectable carbon-14 at all, which is why they are used to calibrate accelerated mass spectrometers.
And to top it all off, these bogus dates between 22,000 and 40,000 years ago don't even fit within their timeline, where they think that the Earth is only around 6,000 years old.
All that points out is that the technology is not perfect. Again, there can be not one bit of carbon-14 in a diamond if it's hundreds of thousands of years old. Not any. You're simply attempting to avoid the obvious here. Evolutionists do this all the time.
I've seen a number of creationist studies that do this exact same thing, and of course get similar results, but they're never published in an actually reputable journal, because any peer-reviewed reputable journal would know just how ridiculous this is.
No, it's not because of what you say. It's because evolutionists are afraid to have evidence that overthrows their careers published. You see, scientists are real people too. And if evolutionists disproved, thousands of science jobs disappear. Poof. The whole field of evolutionary biology is gone. Many scientists and university professors' entire careers are based upon evolution. You see, the sad thing is that evolution theory has permeated so many fields of science, even psychology, that its little roots, like the roots of a mold growing in a cheese, have infiltrated everything about science so much that scientific fields now depend on the dogma of evolution. And because they attempt to explain everything tied in with and in relation to evolution, which is really pathetic, because science doesn't need evolution theory at all. Here's an example. You don't need to know anything about the evolution theory at all, or believe anything about it, to do anything in science when it comes to biology. Nothing. Science and biology have nothing to do with each other. You can learn everything there is to know that is currently known about the operations inside a cell and about intercellular systems in the organs in a human being or any other animal without ever learning anything about evolution. Because evolution doesn't tell you anything about how something functions. It's a theory about origins, how things came into being. It has nothing to do with how they function now, except for maybe your false belief that they do what they do now because evolution brought them into existence. But evolutionists refuse to allow evolution to be challenged because it's their paradigm. It is, in fact, their religion. And numerous people have called evolutionists out on this. Even evolutionists themselves have called each other out on this. The peer review system is broken because it doesn't allow anything to be challenged. Science is about overthrowing what the majority believe. The consensus opinion of scientists is always overthrown whenever a new scientific discovery is made. What they believe is the cause of a particular phenomenon is replaced with something new. So what everybody was believing has been replaced. What they were believing was incorrect, you see? And that's how science really works. That's how it's supposed to work. But that's not how evolutionists let it work. Now, Dr. Jerry Bergman here, who's got more education than the vast majority of people on the planet, he's more educated than the vast majority of people in the world. He's written a book called Slaughter of the Dissidents, and you can see a YouTube presentation given by him where he describes the dogmatic protection of evolution theory in the peer-reviewed journals and in secular universities. It's not a game that evolutionists get away with anymore, saying the reason creationists don't get published is because their work is pure and bad science. That doesn't work anymore. That doesn't jive. People have become aware that that's not the case. The truth is that evolutionists staunchly forbid anything about evolution theory from being challenged, either in academia or in the science journals. And if you are a university professor and you say, I have doubts that evolution is true, you have just gone to academic Siberia, your career is over. If you doubt that, read the book by Dr. Jerry Bergman called Slaughter of the Dissidents, in which he describes numerous cases of people being fired or losing tenure even, or being demoted for nothing more than doubting evolution theory. Now that's not the way science works. That's how you protect your religion, maybe, if your religion is a bad one. But that's not how science works. The evolutionists refuse to allow anything to come up against their ideas in academia as much as possible because they don't want their religion challenged and they're afraid they'll lose their career. So they'd rather make sure you don't have a career if you doubt the pseudoscience they believe, then their career will be in jeopardy. But all this is changing. Evolution theory is a dying theory in academia. More and more scientists are learning that the evidence simply doesn't work for evolution and that the evidence is profoundly strong for intelligent design. Evolution theory is dying. It will be expunged from academia in the future. Not because of dogmatic protection of anything, not because of the hard work of anybody, but because secular scientists are continuously discovering the most profound evidences for intelligent design in biological life, and they can't continue to ignore it forever. At some point, it's just going to be a bunch of scientists in a room talking to each other about evolution, all of them looking at each other, stony-faced, with egg on their face, thinking to themselves, what the heck are we doing? We all know, everybody in this room knows, evolution is false. The evidence for intelligent design is overwhelming. Why do we keep talking about it as though it's true? And they're just going to stop playing the game and say, you know what, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I don't know about you, Charles. What about you, Bob? What about you, Fred? And they're all going to say, you know what, you're right. Forget it. What are we doing? This is ridiculous. Evolution has been disproved. Everything was intelligently designed. Let's make a change. I'm willing to stand up. Are you? And that's exactly what's going to happen. It's already beginning to happen. It's inevitable. Evolution theory is a goner. It's only a matter of time. It will be replaced. It will be replaced by intelligent design. Not special creation. Not at first, anyway. And when they eventually acknowledge life was created, and they will, they'll give that credit to the Antichrist, not to the Lord God who made it. For example, here's a couple of statements by scientists on this subject. Only the first one is by a creationist, Dr. James Tour, one of the foremost scientists of the world, one of the most influential scientists in the world currently. In the last few years, I have seen a saddening progression at several institutions. I have witnessed unfair treatment upon scientists that do not accept the macroevolutionary argument and for their having signed the above referenced statement regarding the examination of Darwinism. I never thought that science would have evolved like this. Dr. Dmitry Kunestov says, interestingly, I have read a number of biographies of scientists who are leaders in both creationism and evolutionary thought. The overwhelming trend is that the leaders of evolutionary thought all make their living purely from evolutionary theory. They are specialists in evolution, and there is no way that you could see how someone whose entire life and reputation and livelihood are bound up with the theory could turn against it. On the other hand, the leaders of the creationist movement usually have made a name for themselves in some area of fundamental and applied science, real science, before moving into creation science. Michael Ruse, one of the world's most eminent philosophers of science, an evolutionist, by the way, says, evolution is promoted by its practitioners as more than mere science. Evolution is promulgated as an ideology, a secular religion, a full-fledged alternative to Christianity with meaning and morality. I am an ardent evolutionist and an ex-Christian, but I must admit this one complaint. The literalists, that is, creationists, are absolutely right. Evolution is a religion. This was true of evolution in the beginning, and it is true of evolution still today. Roger Lewin, the most famous science writer in the world, said, it is in fact a common fantasy, promulgated mostly by the scientific profession itself, that in the search for objective truth, data dictate conclusions. If this were the case, then each scientist faced with the same data would necessarily reach the same conclusion. But as we've seen earlier, and we'll see again and again, frequently this does not happen. Data are just as often molded to fit preferred conclusions. These statements are astonishing admissions that the scientific community, which upholds evolution theory by force, not by scientific data, protects the evolution theory in a dogmatic and religious way because their careers depend upon it, not because of what science has shown us, because science has disproved evolution theory 1,000,000 times over. Here's a perfect example for you. Back when evolutionists were denying that soft tissue was found in dinosaur fossils, and they were firing people for saying they had found soft tissue in dinosaur fossils, Dr. Mark Armitage, who is a microscopist, was describing what he observed, which was soft tissue in dinosaur fossils. This is what happened to him and other scientists for speaking the truth about soft tissue having been discovered in dinosaur fossils. Now, the reason evolutionists were angry about this and were firing people for it was because they can't stand the idea that science might overthrow their evolution theory, because in their mind they understood that it's not plausible to believe that soft tissue could survive for 60 some odd million years, not even 1,000,000. But since then, they've put forth false ideas about iron supposedly preserving it and all that in a study that shows that iron can preserve ostrich tissues for up to 200 times normal, and then speculate that this could explain soft tissue surviving for millions of years, as though that's a scientific idea. Before they were doing that, they were denying that soft tissue existed in dinosaur bones, because it argued against their paradigm. Why else would they have been firing people for stating that soft tissue had been discovered? Now the evolutionists have been forced by the data to acknowledge that soft tissue actually has been preserved and found in dinosaur fossils. You remember I said evolution theory is a dying theory and will one day be overthrown? This is a beautiful example of how the evidence shows that evolutionists are having to admit things that argue against their evolution theory. But as Michael Roos said, and as Dr. James Tour and others have said, evolutionism is held forth by force, not by scientific data. And so they mold the data to fit the evolution theory to preserve it. Instead of acknowledging that soft tissue cannot be preserved by any means for millions of years, they fabricate a false theory that it can be preserved for millions of years, which there is no scientific data nor any reason to believe it could be true, and then simply say it happens. And that's supposed to be science. Anyway, here's Dr. Mark Armitage and what happened to him when it comes to peer review, when he was one of the scientists putting forth the evidence that soft tissue has been preserved in dinosaur fossils.
So we published it. We published this in a major journal. In fact, it got fast-tracked into the journal. I think it was 30 days from the time we submitted it until the time that it was accepted, which is unheard of. Most of my papers take a year to a year and a half to get published. And so this was published very quickly. And of course, at the time I was running an electron microscope laboratory, a premier multi-million-dollar laboratory at California State University, Northridge, in the biology department. And the paper was published. Before that, one of the pictures of the soft fibrillar bone mass with the osteocytes in it was published on the cover of the American Laboratory. And that didn't sit well with some of the faculty members. And so shortly after the paper was published, I found myself out on the street and without a job.
I mean, they even claimed casually that they found human-like footprints alongside dinosaur footprints. It's ridiculous.
What you call ridiculous is a science fact. Dinosaur and human tracks have been found in the same strata in more than one place in the world. They are absolutely human, and they have been proven to be human. In fact, one of them has been run through a hospital CT scanner. And the scanner shows the internal pressures inside the material where the human foot stepped, including the pressure in the heel and the ball of the foot, and at the tip of the toes, and the absence of pressure in the arch. They are absolutely human, and they're real, and you can't wish them away. One of the most interesting features of these footprints is that they show that the foot of the human being was enormous compared to a modern human's footprint. And that's exactly what we would expect if the flood of Noah took place. The damage to the Earth's environment caused organisms to get smaller, to be incapable of producing giant varieties of themselves after the flood. And even humans got smaller, which is why we have wisdom teeth problems today.
So are dinosaurs real? Sure, they're real. They're even found in the Bible. But dinosaur is a recent word, and until modern day, most people call dinosaurs dragons.
And now, who's making a lot of speculation?
What you call speculation could almost be called a historical fact. Humans have been depicting known species of dinosaurs in art for a long time, because man did in fact walk with dinosaurs. It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. The evidence is beyond overwhelming. The only reason you deny it is because you're an evolutionist and an atheist. If you were absolutely honest with the evidence, you too would acknowledge that man walked with dinosaurs based on nothing more than the fact that man not only wrote about, but depicted known species of dinosaurs in art for a very long time.
Dinosaur means terrible lizard, and while they certainly were very large lizards, we don't know how terrible they actually were, but they must have been a sight to behold.
Okay, you want to talk about misconceptions. Dinosaurs weren't lizards or reptilian at all. In fact, they're more closely related to modern birds. They even had feathers, as we can tell by a number of fossils, not to mention the numerous transitional fossils between birds and dinosaurs.
There are no transitional forms from theropod dinosaurs to birds. The world's bird experts acknowledge there are not. This is an evolutionist myth. You believe a lie. The claim that birds evolved from theropod dinosaurs is one of the most ridiculous claims that evolutionists make. It's made on very sketchy evidence. In fact, all the evidence is against it. Even natural selection argues against it, just as it does everything about evolution theory, to your great astonishment, I am sure. The evidence is quite sketchy about dinosaurs having feathers. It's based on smears that surround certain fossils that evolutionists speculate are feathers that were decaying in the fossil. But those smears could have easily been created by decaying skin. The evidence simply isn't clear enough to declare them fossils of feathers. But you know how evolutionists love to transform their speculations into science facts, allegedly, and then go about telling children in school this is a scientific fact based on their ideas, not on actual evidence. So how does natural selection work against the bird evolution idea? Well, there's really no selective pressure whatsoever to move a bird into the sky from a land-dwelling creature. Evolutionists claim, well, it was to avoid predation. The burden of developing wings and feathers with their specificity and their astonishingly detailed design is simply implausible. Now, it couldn't be to take to the air because the food supply was better in the air, because the food supply for birds is vastly better on the ground. So there's no selective pressure whatsoever to cause a bird to evolve from a theropod dinosaur. Secondly, birds don't have lungs like you and I. The idea that evolution can produce this is absurd. There's simply no plausible method by which we can imagine evolution producing the breathing mechanism of a bird. Another burden for evolution is to change the biology completely, as it would have had to have done so many millions of times. Birds have a crazy high metabolism that requires an almost continuous input of food. A bird will starve to death before most other animals will. Evolution couldn't possibly come up with a scheme to transform the biology of an organism so greatly as to create the biology of a bird. Nor could evolution possibly create the homing mechanism in the brain of a bird, or a salmon fish for that matter, whereby the animal can fly to a particular location on the earth, land in a specific pond or lake, and then fly thousands of miles again by its own GPS to an exact location and do this over again and again and again. The GPS in the heads of the animals of this world is astonishing design. To believe evolution could produce that is nuttery. Completely avian footprint fossils have been found in the earth, deeper in the earth, at a place where evolutionists believe they are 20 million years older than the organisms from which they evolved into birds, the small theropod dinosaurs. That means birds already existed when dinosaurs existed. They coexisted. In fact, fossils of modern birds, completely modern birds like owls, egrets, flamingos, and other completely modern birds, have been found in the fossil record in the same digs as dinosaurs, verifying for us that all these, and many other likely, completely modern birds coexisted with dinosaurs. So there's no evidence nor any reason to believe, and all the evidence argues against the idea that birds evolved from dinosaurs. The evidence is just this: they coexisted with them, just like everything else did.
We often think of the term dinosaur as meaning prehistoric or ancient, but there are accounts all around the world of people fighting huge, terrible lizards and dragons. I mean, think of medieval legends and Chinese symbolism.
Okay, I thought about them, and their descriptions and depictions of dragons don't match any fossils of dinosaurs that we have.
Really? Well, that's denial if I've ever heard it. This is a costume of a dragon created by the Chinese. This is an ancient piece of Chinese art depicting a dragon. There are many of them. And this is an artist's reconstruction of what a specific species of dinosaur looked like. And this is that dinosaur, Draco Rex. These are actual fossils. So you say, none of them match. Really now? Are you telling your viewers the truth, or just what you want them to believe? Maybe what you believe, either in your ignorance or denial. Because you're not sharing the truth with them. You're telling them what they should believe, because that's what you believe. I think it's something you desperately need to believe, isn't it?
It turns out dragons are just myths and legends. Who knew?
Well, it turns out that dragons are dinosaurs, because man coexisted with them and depicted them in art and wrote of his encounters with them right on up through the Middle Ages. Who knew?
Maybe there's more to the story than we're being told in schools. Maybe the children's stories and fairy tales about these dinosaurs living 65 million years ago are just that, fairy tales.
Oh, the irony.
Oh, the denial.
And you have the audacity to call scientific findings fairy tales. Sure.
Oh, sure. But we don't believe in myths. But let's compare. Here's what you believe. You believe that a spaceless dot in space exploded, producing astonishing order, ultimately producing rock soup, which came alive and organized itself into Beethoven and space probes. You believe also that soulless bags of matter write novels. Boy, that's logical, scientific stuff if I ever heard it.
Steve Brading mentioned in his prepared remarks how tree ring data allows you to link together different pieces of wood where the tree ring patterns are the same, that stretches out 14,000 years. I don't think that's the case at all. These are so-called long chronologies. The oldest tree ring, the oldest tree growing, bristlecone pine in the White Mountains of California, has 4,600 rings. That's the oldest one, called the Methuselah tree. They don't use that in this long chronology. And when you examine how they develop these long chronologies, I see some things that aren't very rigorous. First of all, they inject, they say certain rings are missing and they cannot allow it to overlap. They'll take a sequence of rings that match another piece of wood and they'll say, okay, they overlap and that allows us to have a longer sequence. But what they do when they find an old piece of wood, they first radiocarbon date it. And then look and see, and if it's old, then they see maybe we can extend the long chronology. And if we can, we'll publish a paper. Our laboratory, such as the Dendrochronology Laboratory at the University of Arizona, the biggest one around, then we will have the longest chronology. We will get the research dollars when archaeologists want to have something dated by tree rings. And yet they refuse, and I have sat with the director of that laboratory for a half a day, asking him, why won't you let a statistical analysis be done to see if there truly is an overlap? I happen to know from a person who's worked in that lab that they do what I would consider circular reasoning. They do radiocarbon date the slab of wood before they see if they can find a fit. And they do let the human eye and judgment decide, is it a fit? Far better to do it statistically. And a friend of mine has even sent them a computer program to say, well, if you're not going to release the data to us, then please run this computer program. It'll tell you how much confidence you have that there is a fit that allows that long 14,000-year chronology. They haven't done it. Ferguson, who died about 4 years ago, he kept his tree ring raw wood locked in a safe. And at a conference of dendrochronologists, they asked, can we see your wood? And he said, no, I'm afraid creationists will get a hold of it. That's closed-minded.
If creation is true, then the intelligent design of things, especially biological systems, is expected. That would be a symptom. When somebody creates something, it's always designed. They put design properties into it. So if the world was created, if life was created, then we would expect intelligent design to be true by default, by default. So first, about this matter, Dr. Mark Kirschner, founding chair of Department of Systems Biology at Harvard University, has said this. In fact, over the last 100 years, almost all of biology has proceeded independent of evolution, except evolutionary biology itself. Microbiology, molecular biology, biochemistry, and physiology have not taken evolution into account at all. In other words, you don't have to know anything about what you believe about the origin of things to do science with it. All you need to know is the properties of it. For example, physicians don't need to have a clue about evolution theory to do medicine, and they don't use it when they treat disease because it just doesn't matter, it doesn't figure in. Professor Philip Skell, an evolutionist, American chemist, emeritus Evan Hugh professor at Pennsylvania State University, one of the most prominent research universities in the world, says, none of the discoveries of biology and medicine in the past century are dependent on guidance from Darwinian evolution. It provided no support. So my statement is that evolution is not scientifically true and can never be applied in science in any way. Evolutionists believe they're applying evolution to science, but they are not. So the kinds of changes the evolutionists propose, antibiotic immunity, somatic mutation, genetic recombination mutation, changes to allele frequency, physiological adaptation, these are not evolutionary changes. These are horizontal change, not vertical change. It doesn't support evolution. You can't apply evolution to science when you're talking about these things. And these are the things the evolutionists talk about, claiming you can apply them in science. See, for example, finches are still finches. The morphological difference between them is not anatomical. There's no evolution there. Neither is there any evolution in getting various breeds of dog from wolves. That's horizontal change, not vertical change. No evolution. You can't apply that to science. So evolutionists claim that they're applying evolution to science when they see dogs vary, or when they see various things that they're in their imagination, but it's not applying evolution to science. It's applying their ideas about evolution to science. Vertical change is what you see on the right. That can't be applied to science. Horizontal change can be. The evolutionists' idea of vertical change cannot be and has never been applied to science. For example, these are the things that evolutionists claim that they're applying to science. The discovery of evolutionary paths from one taxa to another by studying genetic similarities, phylogenetics, for example. Well, firstly, genes are created. They can't have arisen by evolutionary processes. Therefore, you're not applying anything evolutionary to science. Gene prediction. Increased likelihood of finding a gene in a specific location in the genome of one species because a similar gene with a similar function is found in the genome of another species. But similarities in genetics is not evidence of evolution. I'm going to give more information about that. So you're not applying anything evolution to science when you do this. Immunology, designing drugs to defeat the immune system of viruses and bacteria. Evolutionists claim the ability of a bacteria to gain an immunity to an antibiotic is evolutionary change, and therefore we're doing science when we design antibiotics. That's not true. That's not evolutionary change. It doesn't change the structural design of a bacteria or a virus one iota for it to gain an immunity. Nothing. No number of such changes can ever morph a bacteria into something fundamentally different. It's not evolutionary change, that's horizontal change. You're not applying evolution to science when you talk about immunology. It's not evolution. Algorithms. Using the algorithms found in the DNA molecule to design better human computer algorithms for search and comparison of information. This is actually being done. This is applying intelligent design because algorithms arise from intelligence only. Evolution cannot have imparted algorithms to the information in the DNA. It's impossible. Algorithms arise from intelligence only. It's not even possible for an algorithm to arise by chemistry. Therefore, when we find algorithms in DNA and try to apply them to computer science, what we're applying is creation to a science, not evolution. The fact that the universe and biological systems were created makes science possible because the order, complexity, interdependency, and purpose of the things that exist make us possible for us to study and utilize them. An example, treatment of a disease depends upon a properly functioning system that has experienced entropic change. Beliefs about the origin of the system play no part in treatment of disease. However, the properties of biological systems verify that they were created. So we're applying creation to science and medicine, not evolution. So here are some examples of how creation through intelligent design has been applied in science. The design feature are bump-like tubercles on the humpback whales, which reduce stall and improve aquadynamics. The application is that scientists are now using this to create things like improved fans. You see the bumps on the fan? It improves aerodynamics. It's a superior design. Where'd they get that idea? From whales. Here's another. The design feature of the feet of a gecko. It enables the creature to walk straight up and down glass, a perfectly smooth surface. This is being applied to all kinds of dry glues. Where'd they get the idea? From geckos. Geckos were designed. Here's another. Mercedes-Benz took the shape of the particular boxfish and used it to design the front end of an automobile for improved aerodynamics. Where'd they get the idea? From creation. Evolution couldn't do that. Velcro is another beautiful example. Velcro is a feature of cockleburs that allows their seeds to attach to things so they can be transported and promote the species in other environments. And the result was the invention of Velcro. So here's another. I hope I say this right, the high-speed Shinkansen bullet train in Japan. The designers took the inspiration from the beak of a type of bird called kingfishers to design the front end of it, and the result is more stability and better aerodynamics. They used creation to do it. Here's another. The skin of sharks was used as inspiration for NASA to create what's called riblets film, which improves aqua dynamics. It was even used on a ship, a boat that won a race, partly because of its increased aqua dynamics. Those sharks. The wings. Otto Lilienthal is the man who was first successful for numerous unpowered flights. He got his inspiration from the wings of birds. That's implying intelligent design, not evolution. Here's another. The design feature of what's called the lotus effect, the petals of a lotus plant, they cannot be wetted. The water will bead on them all the time. And this is being applied in science to all kinds of materials that create waterproofing, as you can see in the picture below. Here's another. The design of the termites use to create their mounds automatically creates airflow, which creates improved cooling and condensation. This is now being applied in architecture, such as an Eastgate Center in Zimbabwe. The building has automatic cooling and condensation. It creates its own water supply to some degree because of the design of the mounds created by termites using that. Here's another. Bird protection glass. This is glass that birds can see so they don't fly into it and break their necks. Designed based on a design feature in life. Here's a recent one. An efficient new depth sensor was inspired by spider eyes. This was a recent article. Biometrics laboratory at MIT. They're using all kinds of features that are designed into living systems to create technologies that improve our lives. And these are just a few of them. Engineers, proteins stick like glue, and they've figured out how to make better adhesives by looking at proteins. Another, here comes the sun. A new sunflower-inspired pattern creates solar energy. And here's another. This website here provides numerous examples. Okay. Now, predictions. Can predictions be made? Absolutely. In 1984, creation scientist Dr. Russell Humphreys, former director of Sandia National Laboratories, predicted the magnetic fields of the various planets in our solar system based on the idea that they were created only 6,000 years ago. When NASA sent out their space probes and measured the Voyager 2 spacecraft, for example, it measured their magnetic fields, and guess what? Dr. Humphreys' prediction of their magnetic fields was spot on, based on a 6,000-year-old creation from the solar system. He predicted every single one of them and was right about every single one of them based on the idea, the understanding that they're only 6,000 years old, not millions. How's that for prediction? In between 1997 and 2006, a team of scientists, creationist scientists, at two different creationist organizations created a project called Radioisotopes in the Age of the Earth, and they predicted that if the Earth was only thousands of years old, we should find, because helium is a very slippery molecule, super small, we should find that the rate and the amount of helium in the crystals of zircon crystals of granites throughout the Earth should show a 6,000-year-old age for those granites. I have other predictions that show that science, predicting a young Earth creation model, has shown that science can be applied by prediction can be made based on young Earth creation model and hold true.
I'm used to debating evolution, so it's good to change it up once in a while. So let's get started then. Debate, did dinosaurs or could dinosaurs have lived with man? Now, when I look at this picture, when I think of Jurassic Park, I sometimes assume that the evolutionists think of Jurassic Park and the massive T-Rex and all the commotion and tyranny that it caused when they think of dinosaurs and living with man. Therefore, they think it to be impossible. And it's pretty common for evolutionists to make the claim that since many dinosaurs were gigantic and dangerous, they couldn't have possibly lived with humans, as people would be easy prey for them. What the evolutionists don't acknowledge, however, is that according to their own timeline, humans have lived with plenty of large, dangerous animals. over thousands of years, many of which are now extinct. Look at my slides here. We see the woolly mammoth and the American mastodon, with the same size as modern elephants, as well as this extinct relative of the Komodo dragon, which was likely encountered by the early settlers of Australia. Now, these types of animals would have proved to be a significant threat to people if anybody got close to them, and yet humans were still able to work around them, and in some cases hunt them. If you acknowledge that humans coexisted with these animals, it isn't that big of a step to suggest humans lived with dinosaurs, many of which were the same size or smaller than the animals listed in these slides. Here we can see the auroch, the short-faced bear, glyptodonts. These, even according to the evolutionists, all lived with man. Evolutionists have hijacked dinosaurs and used them to teach millions of years of evolution. When you start with the Bible, dinosaurs start to make a lot of sense. We see the geologic column here. Can man and dinosaur coexist? Well, when we look to the Bible, dinosaurs and man, according to our model, did not live in the same habitat. Just like today, we see that different creatures and different animals live in different habitats. In the pre-flood world, we see certain fossils that are usually buried together, and dinosaur fossils are usually buried with gymnosperms, pines, and naked sea plants, whereas mammal fossils are usually buried with things such as flowering plants. What does this actually indicate? This indicates two different ecosystems. For example, since we're talking about dinosaurs here, although lived at the same time of man, did not necessarily live in the same areas or habitats. They were overcome by the flood at different times during the advancing of the waters, which does explain why we don't find them buried together. It is evident that as the floodwaters rose, they buried organisms in the order that they were encountered. The accepted major groups known in the fossil record are explained by their appearance according to where they lived and not when they lived. So we looked at burial, ecosystems, and habitats. Now, we can actually look to geology, which does point to a watery cataclysm. Much geologic evidence suggests rapid plate tectonics. This isn't the topic of the debate, but when we look to the layering and we look to the dinosaurs and where they're found, we can also look to the flood to confirm that. So man and dinosaur could obviously coexist, but the question is, did they? We looked at dinosaurs in the Bible. Why don't we see the word dinosaur in the Bible? I hear this question from evolutionists all the time. Well, the word dinosaur is a modern word invented in 1841. The King James Version of the Bible, on the other hand, was translated in 1611. The word dinosaur did not exist at the time the King James Bible was translated, obviously. And so it's not surprising that we would not find the word dinosaur in the Bible. We also don't find the word computer in the Bible either. Dragons. We do find the word dragon in the Bible. These giant creatures known as dinosaurs were simply called dragons. Sightings of dragons / dinosaurs have been documented and recorded throughout history. Eyewitnesses from all cultures around the earth, from England to China, have legends and stories about dragons. There are even more than 20 references to dinosaurs in the Bible. This whole controversy could easily have been avoided if they had just called dinosaur bones dragon bones. We see that the evidence that humans knew about dinosaurs before the science of paleontology was founded. How much time do I have, James?
You've got
3 minutes.
I've got about 3.5, but I started a little bit late, so.
Awesome. So we see accurate artwork depicting dinosaurs and allegedly extinct creatures is observed, proving that ancient people saw living dinosaurs. The evolutionary community is baffled and surprised when plants and animals assumed to have gone extinct at the same time as the dinosaurs are suddenly found to be alive. These are known as living fossils. The coelacanth comes to mind. Here's a picture of the coelacanth. The evidence. Dinosaurs have been documented in history by eyewitnesses such as Marco Polo, Herodotus, and Alexander the Great. There exists today a multitude of cave drawings, mosaics, sculptures, and paintings of dinosaurs from ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Cambodia, Europe, Australia, all over the earth. Here's a picture here that was drawn, I believe, in Utah. This picture here, Bishop Bell's dinosaur. In the 15th century, we have Bishop Bell's tomb. We know when he died, and so we know how old this is, and this is much, much before dinosaur fossils have really been found. Not until the 1800s were dinosaur fossils actually found in bulk. We find carved animals in this tomb, and some of these animals, as you've seen, look exactly like dinosaurs, sauropod dinosaurs to be exact. Many of the carved animals are animals alive today, plus dinosaurs. What more proof do you need? We see this painting of the plesiosaur-like creature. The Australian Aborigines painted this painting of a creature that they believe lives in a lake that they won't go near because they're afraid of it. This painting looks exactly like a plesiosaur, which is not a true dinosaur, but had flippers and lived in the water, of course. We know there are countless legends of lake monsters and thousands of testimonies. Was everybody lying? That's what the evolutionist is going to have to conclude. People clearly knew about dinosaurs. I just had to pick a few here, but there's tons. You can look at them yourselves. People have obviously always known about dinosaurs if they drew them. It's conclusive evidence, really. The evidence is clear. Man coexisting with dinosaurs is obvious after looking at the overwhelming amount of evidence. The evidence is staggering due to the endless artifacts, drawings, carvings, statues, mosaics, and depictions throughout history of various dinosaurs or other thought to be extinct animals. We look to the Bible, we hear of a beast called Behemoth who had a tail like a cedar tree. People who have to hold to that evolutionary worldview, they'll say things like Behemoth was obviously a hippo or an elephant. We can go through this, but obviously where the Bible says he moves his tail like a cedar, well, if you've looked at an elephant and a hippo's tail looks nothing like a cedar. For sake of time, I'll move on here. It's all based on their worldview when people say Behemoth cannot be a dinosaur. We see historical accounts, St. George killing a dragon, Beowulf, Alexander the Great. We even see it in empirical scientific evidence, soft tissue and dino bones. New scientific findings have revealed amazingly preserved dinosaur bones, which contain soft tissues, flexible blood vessels, and intact cells. Did you say that was time, James?
Nope, you got about 10 seconds.
This indicates these bones are thousands of years old and not millions. Obviously, the evolutionists have rescue devices. We can get into that if necessary. So thank you so much. I mean, we see stories all around the earth. Locally Abembe, look at that.
Time.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, there is plenty of evidence that dinosaurs lived with man and even went on Noah's Ark. All you have to do is mention the word dinosaur on Noah's Ark or dinosaurs living with man in, say, recent times will lead to scoffing from the atheists, from the evolutionists. But the fact is, this evidence of dinosaurs living with man and that the Bible's history of this universe is accurate is overwhelming. There's actual historic, scientific, and even eyewitness evidence, ample evidence for this. And the fact is that more and more evidence actually continues to be discovered, which actually proves that everything we've been taught about dinosaurs is absolutely wrong. Dinosaurs have been documented in history by eyewitnesses. A few examples that come to mind are Alexander the Great, Marco Polo, Herodotus. You can look for yourself. There exists massive amounts of cave drawings, mosaics, paintings, scriptures, sculptures of dinosaurs from ancient Egypt, Cambodia, Europe, Australia, North America, pretty much all over the earth. And in the scripture, we see the description of dinosaur-like animals: Leviathan, Behemoth. The word dragon is used over and over again. And these sculptures, mosaics, paintings, cave drawings that I talk about, you can actually go see them yourself. We even have documentation of the existence of completely fresh, non-fossilized dinosaur bones. What is unfortunate is that people have been brainwashed, and not only brainwashed, but conditioned to believe that these dinosaurs are actually prehistoric animals beasts that lived until about 65 million years ago. But the fact is, these evolutionary scientists, they're dedicated to convincing you that dinosaurs lived long before man. Because what they have to do, they're like salesmen, evolutionary salesmen. They have to sell you the story, the fairy tale that comes right out of SpongeBob La La Land. That pine trees, whales, and dinosaurs are all related through common ancestry. So if dinosaurs were actually alive within the last few thousand years, this theory of evolution, pond scum to people evolution, becomes highly unlikely. Now, dinosaurs to begin with, they're nothing more than reptiles that continue to grow in size. And most people that I talk to, most people that you will talk to, they seem to be unaware of the fact that reptiles never stop growing in size while they're alive. For example, as humans, we know that our noses and ears never stop growing. And same with mammals and most of the animal kingdom. They grow to a certain size, then stop growing. While they do get older, they don't get any bigger. But with reptiles, as I've stated earlier, they continue to grow in size until the day they die. Let's take a tortoise that has lived over 100 years. It's known and documented that they get to be the size of a bathtub. Imagine a tortoise that could live up to 500 years. They'd be the size of a garage. Now, when we actually examine dinosaurs, and if we look to the biblical record of history, say before Noah's flood, we know that man lived to be hundreds of years old. Methuselah, for example, lived to be 969 years old. And after the flood, when the lifespan of man was decreased based on the after effects of the flood, based on genetic entropy, the accumulation of low impact, deleterious mutations, the ages of man have dropped off. Take that back to a point of, say, least genetic entropy. Imagine if these animals had the ability to live that long as well. We know today that reptiles never stop growing in size throughout their entire lifetime. Therefore, picture a Komodo dragon, picture a gecko. What are they going to look like after 500 years? Can you say dinosaur? Now, to not get into too much detail about the biblical evidence, let's look at the evidence of dinosaurs living with man in recent history. Because like I said earlier, it's overwhelming due to the countless artifacts, drawings, mosaics, carvings, depictions. You can see depictions of Brachiosaurus, plesiosaurs, pterodactyls, triceratops, T-Rex, and many, many more. The question is, for the evolutionist, if man didn't live with these creatures, how did artists throughout ancient history and in cultures all over the world happen to draw these animals, to recreate these giant beasts? Was it just all coincidence that it turns out that they look nearly identical to what we see in the books about dinosaurs in museums today? I've heard evolutionists say, well, they must have seen dinosaur skeletons back then too, and that's how they were able to recreate them and draw them. And it's not just a coincidence. They've seen the bones. But the thing is, this argument fails tremendously. And the reason why is that dinosaur skeletons, they're not just found lying on the ground intact, as if someone's going to walk by, look down, and see what that dinosaur looked like. The bones are always fragmented, they're separated, and they're embedded deep within the ground or within the rock. And most of them are missing. Occasionally, yes, you might find a piece of a single bone, say, sticking out of a rock here and there. But at the end of the day, that's pretty much all that we actually find. And if you actually think about this logically, what does logic say? That's all anyone in ancient history would have been able to find as well. And there's no way they would have been able to create that image of the entire animal, the entire dinosaur, without the entire skeleton. We know that the science of paleontology did not develop until the early 1800s. It's all rescue device after rescue device and post hoc, ad hoc explanations coming from the evolutionist side. This process of digging out and excavating dinosaur bones from, say, rock didn't begin until then, and as a consequence, the first complete skeleton of a dinosaur was not constructed until the 1800s. The word dinosaur, which everybody knows means, great or terrible lizard, it didn't exist before 1841. That's when it was coined. But that doesn't mean dinosaurs didn't exist. It just means that these giant animals, these reptiles, these creatures weren't called dinosaurs before 1841. This is what logic dictates. They were called dragons, and what do we see? Thousands of dragon legends from cultures all around the world. Dragon sightings have been documented and recorded throughout history by eyewitnesses. They've been part of all sorts of legends and cultures all around the earth, from China to England to everywhere. And as I said earlier, there's even over 20 references to dinosaurs in the Bible. But of course, if the word dinosaur wasn't coined until 1841, they were not called dinosaurs, they were called dragons, since the word didn't exist yet. This all fits perfectly within a biblical base model. So how did these people 2,000-3,000 years ago, how did they know almost exactly what dinosaurs look like? Listen guys, there's only two options. Either logically, they saw the dinosaurs with their own eyes, or they could have constructed the skeletons. There's not really a third logical option. That won't sound ridiculous at the end of the day. So if we actually look into these explanations, and we look at, say, civilizations throughout history, to think that they actually knew exactly what dinosaurs looked like in detail by just seeing, dinosaur skeletons, at the end of the day, that's not logical. Because as I said earlier, the first skeleton was not even put together until the 1800s. And there's not as many dinosaur skeletons as you'd think. The fossil record, we can look to paleontologist Dr. Kurt Wise. He's got a PhD in geology from Harvard University. He'll tell you, this is confirmed. This is fact that only 0.0025% of the entire fossil record consists of more than a single bone of vertebrate animals. And after nearly hundreds of years, 200 years to be exact, of paleontology, we have now been able to come up with just a few fossils of large dinosaurs. And there's almost no evidence in history of previous civilizations digging and excavating bones, let alone creating entire skeletons, as some of these evolutionary apologists would have you believe. But remember, they need to hang on to that primary assumption that pond scum to people evolution is true. At best, if you want to give them something, someone in history maybe found an occasional large bone shard, say in the ground, and tell their buddies, okay, this belonged to some type of big animal, but it's not logical at all. As a matter of fact, it's illogical to believe that they could, with their imagination, guess exactly what, say, a Tyrannosaurus or a Brachiosaurus or a Triceratops would look like, or any other dinosaurs for that matter. I could go on and on and on. Plesiosaurs, for example. How would they know that these depictions were identical to what they actually look like, the ones that we see in these artworks, the cave drawings, the sculptures, the mosaics, and writings that we can go into thoroughly throughout history and from many different cultures around the world. Usually, and what it is about legends, thousands of legends, is they come from a common source. Ask yourself, whether you're a believer, you're on the fence, or you're a critic, if these dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago before modern man evolved, and the first dinosaur skeleton was then not excavated and constructed until the early 1800s, how did human artwork throughout all of history just so perfectly manage to come out and depict several types of dinosaurs that look absolutely identical to the dinosaur depictions we see in the science books today? It's a simple answer, guys, as everything is. Start with a biblical-based model, a biblical-based assumption. What's the answer? They drew what they saw with their own eyes.